Good morning. Hello, everyone. For those just joining us, thank you for coming. I see our numbers are creeping up steadily, but we have lots to cover today. So I think in the interest of time, we can get started momentarily. And a warm greeting to all of you joining us, as I see a few of you have messaged in the chat already. So um, if you're having any problems with your audio, perhaps sometimes better just to join and rejoin the session and just see if that might fix it for you. But otherwise, message our team in the chat and we'll do our best to help you if we can. But with that, I think we'll be getting started. So a big thank you and welcome everyone for joining us. We really appreciate you joining us for this half day of training on applying the IFRS Sustainability Disclosure Standards. So I'm Fiona Quinlan from the UN SSE training team, and we're really pleased today to be collaborating with a number of organisations to deliver this training for you. So firstly, a big thank you to the IFRS Foundation, our partners and co-facilitators for this training, as well as the IFC, our partners as well. And really, this program is truly collaborative and driven by that demand we're seeing in the market for more support to implement the IFRS standards. So a further thank you, of course, to FEAS for hosting us here today with them as well. We really appreciate them bringing this content to you. And of course, to you as our participants for joining us and taking the time out of your busy days to spend the time with us. So I'm going to be covering some introductions from the SSE side, but before I do, we have some welcome remarks from the FEAS organisation to get us started. So I'm very pleased to introduce the FEAS Secretary General today, Konstantin Saryan, who joins us, I think, in the midst of a busy day by the sounds of it. So we really appreciate you taking the time out, Konstantin, and the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Fiona, and good morning, everyone. It's good to have all of you on this webinar, basically, which is organized which is organized by our one of our main partners, Sustainable Stock Exchange Initiative, with whom we have a couple of projects which we are doing, and we are keeping in touch with SSE because the sustainability issue is one of the most important in nowadays world. And we think this kind of webinar and kind of events are not only important for FEAS, basically for the secretariat, but for the members. These events we see that probably will be not the only one, and we will be looking forward to discuss and to find some other also initiatives with SSE to make it for you. Also, I would like to say thank you to IFC for supporting this webinar, and IFRS Sustainability Capacity Building Foundation again for providing their expertise in this topic. And at the end of my opening remarks, I would like to say big thank you to SSE initiative entire team, because this cooperation is very important for FEAS and its community. So thank you, and have a nice day, and also we are looking forward to your participation, with the active participation in this webinar. Thank you once again, Fiona.
Thank you, Konstantin. No, much appreciated, and thank you for setting the session in context so well. I think it's yeah, great to have this partnership, as you say. And maybe I'll just leave you to give a little wave, Armanui as well. But we also joined by Armanui, the Deputy Secretary General at FEAS as well. She'll be, I think, in the background during the session, but we'll be listening in if you have any questions for FEAS as we move along as well. But we really thank you both for your time to join us today. Brilliant. So with that, I'll get started with covering a few of the basics for today's session. So I'll cover a few housekeeping points and just explain a little bit about the agenda for the session. So firstly, you've probably noticed by now that as a participant, you're muted in the training. And unfortunately, we're not able to take live comments today. However, we would really encourage you to use the written options that you have to engage with the session. So you're very welcome to use the chat function if you'd like to share any comments as we move along, or just to share what organization you're joining from. And also we have the Q&A box as well. So the Q&A box is where we'd like you to put any particular questions for the team. That just allows us to track those and make sure we're answering them for you. But please do make sure you're using that option as we go along to ask your questions. And in terms of the format today, so as you're probably aware, we're live together for 3.5 hours in today's workshop. And we have a optional homework assignment that you can do as well in follow-up if you'd like to. We have a live Q&A, as I've mentioned, throughout the event, as well as lots of other opportunities to participate. So we're going to be using Menti as an interactive tool today, as well as a number of Zoom polls. So we really encourage you to take part in the interactive elements of the session. It's great to get that involvement from everyone here, and we hope it helps you to continue to apply the learning that we're talking through together as well. Then if you take part today in our live training, at the end, you'll be eligible to receive a certificate of completion. There is a short survey that you'll need to complete to receive that certificate, and we'll explain more to you about that at the end of the training as well. So to say a little bit about who's going to be delivering the training today, as I've mentioned, I'm Fiona from the SSE team, and I'm joined by my colleague Lois Guthrie as well. And alongside us, we have two experts from the IFRS sustainability organisation as well. So we have Robert and Bella, both based within the capacity building team at the IFRS. So we hope you'll agree a great opportunity to ask those particular questions that you might have about the standards as we go along as well. So please do make the most of that opportunity. Great. So in terms of our learning objectives from today's training, so we have three key areas that we hope will be able to help you progress in today's training. So firstly, we hope to help you to understand the ISSB standards. So what are they fundamentally? What are they trying to do? And what do they consist of? We'll then hope to address understanding how to use the ISSB standards. So thinking about how to really start to apply them in your own organizations. And then finally, we hope to help you identify what steps can be taken to develop a disclosure plan to apply the ISSB standards. So thinking really again about how to build out that plan to take this forward within your own companies. So breaking that down, we've built a four kind of module structure to help simplify and take us through those steps, which you'll see on the screen now. So we'll be following the structure aligned to these four modules today. So hopefully we'll help you to know where we are as we move through the training program. So we're going to start with our first module, Prepare, which is all around building on existing knowledge that you might have of sustainability reporting. So thinking about its purpose, the overall reporting landscape, and the global baseline that the ISSB standards have formed. We'll then move into Module 2, or Align, which is all around setting the direction or the railroad tracks for sustainability reporting. So thinking about how you'll apply and utilize the standards and what additional disclosures you might need to add to your existing reporting. And then we have Implement, which is all around the practices and systems side of things. So thinking about how you can really take forward the different risks and opportunities you're going to be disclosing under S1 and S2 within your organizations. And then finally, we'll finish up with Communicate. So thinking about the final format of your reporting, how you'll locate the information when you'll put it out there, and how to do so with efficiency and with confidence for your stakeholders. Okay, and just to show that in another way, this is how these four modules break down across the structure of our 3.5 hours together. So you'll note we also have a short break in the middle of the session as well. We know it's quite a long time to concentrate for online, so hopefully that will be helpful, but just gives you a sense of that structure. And you'll see in particular that the module 2, all around aligning with the standards themselves, is quite a large module. So please know that we are more than halfway through after we finish module 2. It's just where a lot of the content sits. And so just to mention a few practical points as well. So throughout the training today, we're going to be referring through the slides to different links and resources. And you're able to find this information on the event web page, which Lois is sharing the link to in the chat with you now. Thank you, Lois. So if you go to that page and at the bottom section under resources, you'll be able to download the slide presentation from today's session and also the homework assignment as well, if you'd like to do that. So that will allow you to hopefully follow along with the materials and also follow any of the links that we refer to. Within that, you'll also find some slides that we've hidden in today's presentation, but just give you extra case studies or extra context as well. So it's worth having a look at those materials as well. And as I've mentioned already, we have an optional homework assignment, which you can do if you'd like to continue your learning. The homework assignment is structured around helping you to build that draft disclosure plan for your organisation. So we hope that's really a useful addition to help you put into practice what you're learning today and to take that forward in terms of internal discussions with your colleagues. But again, you can find the access page to that assignment at the link that Lois has shared in the resources section as well. And just to mention a few more tools that will be available to you to take forward in your organizations. So the SSE have what we refer to as our toolkit of resources to support disclosure. We have our model guidance and our gap analysis checklist, which have really built to align with and support the implementation of the ISSB standards, as well as a number of other resources focused on climate aspects in particular. So make sure to take a look at these as well, and you can access them at the QR code there. Okay, so just to get things started on the interactive side of things, we have a Menti exercise to kick things off. So Lois is going to share the link shortly with you in the chat to Menti, and I'll also share my screen. Thank you, Lois. I'll share my screen now as well, because that gives you a number of additional ways that you can join us in the session as well. So the other options that you would have would be to go to the menti.com link at the top of the screen there and enter the 4-digit code that you can see. And you can also use that QR code that's available at the bottom of the screen there. So 3 different ways to join us, but probably the easiest one is just to click the link in the chat, I would say. Once you're in, our first question for you today is just to tell us in your own words 3 key words about why you're joining us in today's training and what you're here for. We'll be using Menti, as I said, a number of times through the session, so it's worth taking a moment now to find your access so that you can come back to take part in the other exercises we'll be doing throughout the session as well. I see a few of you have already made it, so that's great. So I see some words coming in: learning, sustainability, frameworks, ESG. Feel free to share any more that you may have. I'll just give everyone another minute to have a think about that. Okay, I see environmental protection, reporting as well, knowledge, strengthening. Great, lots more coming through. Processes, investing, interesting. Preparing, learning new material. Great. Yeah, I think all hopefully very aligned and relevant to what we're seeking to cover in the session today. So I think that tells us you're in the right place. So that's fantastic. Brilliant. I see a few more of you taking part now, so that's great. See learning requirements, sharing information, and feel free to share your information as well in the chat. So if you've got any perspectives on how you're taking forward any of these topics with your own organizations, feel free to share that in the chat as well. I know that's always very interesting for everyone. Okay, fantastic. So one more question just to get us started now. So this is just to get a sense. I'll just close the QR code, but if anyone does need it again, you can drop a message in the chat and we can share it. But this is just to get a sense of where you're at today with those 3 key learning objectives that we talked through just at the beginning there. So giving us a sense really from the left-hand side of maybe not being comfortable with those areas currently and very new to them, to the right-hand side being very comfortable and having perhaps quite a good understanding already. Let us know where you think you're at with explaining the ISSB to your team members, using the ISSB standards, and developing a sustainability reporting strategy. Just give you all a few seconds to have a little think about that. Okay. See, the number gives you this sort of average there, but you can see in the background the sort of range of answers that we're getting. So it looks like there's a little bit of a mix, but there's quite a few people, I think, who feel maybe already fairly comfortable with the standards, but plenty of you as well coming out maybe more in the middle of the pack with a little bit less comfort, which of course is absolutely fine, and that's what we're here today to support you with. Okay, brilliant. So good to get a sense of that from everyone. Thank you. So we'll come back to Menti later. So I recommend leaving that tab open in the background and we'll revisit it together. So I'll go back into the slide presentation now, and then we'll come back to Menti later. Okay, brilliant. Now, thanks everyone for sharing and getting us started. So I'm now going to cover off our first introductory module. And just before I do, I have a quick disclaimer, just to leave here for a moment for you to review. This is just to be really clear about how we're going to be using company examples today. So these are really simply here to help add some colour to what we're talking about. Sometimes we know it can help to see a real example to put into practice what we're talking about. However, we just want to be clear that examples shouldn't necessarily be seen as the best or the right way to do this. Of course, each company has unique circumstances and should do what suits them best, but we hope these provide some inspiration for you. Okay, with that established, and we'll remind you of that a little bit later on when we're doing an example for the first time as well. But to kick us off, as I said, I'll be starting with our first aspect of prepare. So this is all around building that solid foundation of knowledge, building on what you might already know about sustainability reporting and the different knowledge frameworks and standards that we already have. So here we generally like to cover three important aspects. So we cover the purpose, so what's the case and the drivers for sustainability reporting, including the market and business case. Then we move into landscape. So this is all around how reporting has evolved, including how it's becoming simplified. And then finally, we finish with the global baseline. So thinking about the core concepts and requirements in IFRS S1 and S2 that set this global baseline. So to get it started, we're looking at this why aspect and the purpose of sustainability reporting. So we're going to dive into the case for sustainability disclosure and market drivers. But to get us started on that, we really wanted to just get a sense from you as to what your key reasons are for disclosing or starting to think about disclosing sustainability related information. So we've got a quick poll for you that I've just launched now. So let us know which of these drivers are the most significant for you in your reasons for disclosing sustainability related information, or perhaps just being focused on this topic if you're not directly responsible for reporting already. So this could be about regulation, about sharing your own management or organization's objectives and strategy. Maybe there's some peer pressure with other companies in your sector reporting or the expectation that you do. Maybe you're getting a lot of interest from your investors, or perhaps you maybe have other reasons as well. So feel free to share those in the chat with us if you'd like to. Or maybe this is just the beginning of sustainability reporting for you and you're not yet disclosing and maybe you're not sure why you should. So that's something we hope we can help you to explore today as well. So no problems if that's where you're at currently. Okay, I see some responses coming in. I'll give you all a little moment more to think about that. We always like to get as many of you taking part in these polls as we can. So please do. Oh, my lights have gone out in the room. So whilst you're answering the poll, I'm just going to turn the lights back on. Sorry. There we are. That's a bit brighter. So great. I think just over half of you have taken part in the poll now. So I think we'll leave that there and I'll end the poll for you and share those results. So you'll see regulatory requirements is coming out there for many as the top reason for being focused on this, which I think is very understandable. But the second most common answer as well we see there is investor interest, but a number of you also noting that the other areas are reasons for you. So good to get a sense from you all. Thanks for sharing that. Okay. So going back into the slide presentation now, I think really that investor interest angle that a lot of you have highlighted there is indeed a key focus that we hear across many markets for being focused on these topics. So you'll see here that we have some data from the Principles for Responsible Investment, just showing the number of signatories to this initiative. And you'll see how much that's grown in the past sort of 5 to 10 years or so now, with really a very significant proportion of assets under management now signatories to this principles. I think just a good overall indicator of investor interest. And so what is it that's really driving that interest? So I think what we want to highlight here in this case is that the key driver behind this demand from investors is the relevance and significance of the potential financial effects from sustainability issues. Here we're showing a study of retail investors, which was done by Morgan Stanley, where they found that the top driver of at least these individual investors that was driving their interest in sustainability was the financial performance of these factors. So you can take a closer look at this study by following the link in the handout if you'd like to, but let's look a little bit closer before we move on as to what we mean by financial performance. So it's important to remember today we're talking about disclosing financially material sustainability related information. So we're going to talk later in the workshop about what we mean more specifically by material, but from the start we wanted to be clear what sorts of financial effects investors are looking to have more information on. So let's start with the effects on a company's performance, which we often see in the statement of profit or loss, which shows income or revenue and expenditure. So sustainability related risks and opportunities can have a financial effect by changing the revenue mix or total revenue of a company if demand for products and services change or production capacity is disrupted, for example. And we could also see substantial changes in expenditures if, for example, operating costs increase due to energy prices rising, or perhaps if there's a need for greater R&D expenditure to capitalize on sustainability related opportunities, or maybe there's other costs associated with deploying new practices as well. So those are some examples of the types of effects on financial performance that we might see. And you're also probably going to hear us today talking about the effects on a company's financial position. So let's look also at what that means. And so we can often see a company's financial position on their balance sheet, known as a statement of financial position. So, for example, a company might experience changes to certain assets or liabilities due to climate or sustainability issues. So we could potentially see changes to portfolio value, or we might even see write-offs of certain assets that are damaged or need to be repriced. And another financial effect that should be documented is changes to financing and the cost of capital. So that can include, for example, increases in insurance premiums, maybe as a result of increased exposure to climate risks, but also new options in terms of financing structures as well. So, for example, potential to access green bonds or social bonds. And before we move into the next unit, I also just wanted to flag two really important concepts relating to sustainability related risks and opportunities, which are really essential to our understanding of them and our disclosures. So here you'll see from the latest Global Risk Perception Survey from the World Economic Forum how risks evolve over time. So whereas we have those shorter term risks on a 2-year time frame, actually the risks that may pose the most significant threat over 10 years timeframes might not be high on our mind today. However, what's important for our disclosure is that if we're to be prepared for those risks that we're expecting to potentially arrive in 5 or 10 years from now, we might actually have to invest today in new practices or processes to potentially mitigate any negative impacts or increase our chances for positive impacts in the future. And so this means that we potentially could have financial effects occurring much earlier than the risk itself suggests. So that's something to keep in mind as you're thinking about today's training and as you're starting to prepare your disclosures as well, that time can be a slightly distinct and specific aspect when we come to sustainability issues. And another important aspect of sustainability-related risks and opportunities to highlight is their interconnectivity. So this is another visual from that same World Economic Forum report. And here you can just see how many interconnections there are between different risk types. And so whilst many people might think of the two ISSB standards, we have S1 on general topics and sustainability topics, and S2 on climate, those might be seen as distinct things. However, as you can see from this slide, all of these topics are inherently interconnected, and therefore separating out one topic or theme doesn't remove these connections. We still have to try and think about these issues in the whole when we're making decisions on them and reporting on them. And similarly, of course, the way that we have to manage these risks is interconnected too. So this is just to keep in mind as we're moving through this training that although you'll be disclosing under S1 and S2 as we talk about, it's important to continue to connect and apply the standards in parallel to each other as well. Okay, that brings us to the end of purpose. So I'll hand over to Lois now, who's going to take us into landscape. Thanks, Lois.
Thank you, Fiona, and hello, everybody. We've looked with Fiona at why sustainability reporting standards are important. Now we're going to look at how the IFRS sustainability disclosure standards have developed within the landscape of existing reporting standards. But before we do that, we'd just like to check with you what frameworks you are currently using for sustainability disclosure. So you can choose all the answers that apply here. Are you currently reporting using the Carbon Disclosure Project, the CDP survey or questionnaire, the Global Reporting Initiative standards, the Integrated Reporting Framework, the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board standards, the recommendations of the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosure, the principles of the UN Global Compact, or something else? And if there are other things you're using, please tell us about that in the chat. Yes, UNEP FI, yes. Our colleagues at the UN Environment Programme Finance Initiative produced some standards. Thank you for all your responses. I'll share the results with you now. And you can see that there's a spread of different usages of frameworks, but the main one certainly is the Global Reporting Initiative. The GRI standards are being used by many of you, followed by the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board standards, some of you using integrated reporting, not so many CDP and the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosure. So thank you for letting us know what you're currently using. That's helpful context for us. Let's look now at the structure of the IFRS Foundation and how the International Sustainability Standards Board came to be. Well, within the IFRS Foundation, there are two independent standard setting boards. The International Accounting Standards Board you see at the bottom of the screen there in the dark blue box, that was formed in 2001. They set accounting standards and they are in place in over 140 jurisdictions around the world, and those accounting standards are branded IFRS Accounting. And the International Sustainability Standards Board was formed in 2021 and released its first two standards that we're going to be talking about today, IFRS S1 and S2, following strong market demand for its establishment, and the ISSB standards are branded IFRS Sustainability. The two boards are within the same foundation. They work closely together to ensure that their standards complement each other. The standard setting boards are governed by trustees who are in turn accountable to a monitoring board of public authorities. So how did this evolve? Well, all of the logos you see on the screen, all of the organizations represented by those logos have contributed to the evolution of sustainability reporting. They actually have a lot in common, all working towards sustainability disclosure, but because they have a range of different objectives, guidelines and standards, the number of organisations in this reporting space has caused some confusion. But today, this slide actually shows a picture of simplification and harmonisation. You can see from the arrows on the screen that, for example, some organisations have been consolidated into the IFRS Foundation. So the Climate Disclosure Standards Board, Integrated Reporting and SASB, all of their work is now in the IFRS Foundation. The TCFD, the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, has now concluded its work that has been taken over by the IFRS Foundation. It's also taken over the disclosure-specific materials of the Transition Plan Task Force, and CDP has aligned its climate questionnaire with IFRS S2 on climate disclosure. So all of those organisations were focused on preparing information for investor information needs. But the GRI, their standards still exist independently, but they have committed through a memorandum of understanding to jointly identify and align common disclosures with the IFRS sustainability. So there's a picture of simplification and harmonisation, but more work going on to ensure a seamless reporting landscape. So let's look at this question now. Not many of you were using TCFD, but we've just said that the TCFD recommendations are now taken over by the IFRS Foundation. So the question is, companies who disclose using the TCFD recommendations automatically comply with the ISSB standards. Is this true or false? Let's give you a minute to think about that. Great to see so many of you participating. Thank you. We've got over 50% participation, so I'm going to share the results with you. And it is quite evenly split, as you can see from the answer. 53% of you said it's true, 47% said it's false. Well, those of you that said it's false are correct. If you are currently disclosing using the TCFD, you will have a lot of information you need for ISSB disclosure, but you cannot assume that you automatically comply with the ISSB standards. There's a number of reasons for this, and I'm going to share them with you now. Well, the TCFD and IFRS Foundation sustainability standards have been compared, and that comparison is in the document you see on the left-hand side. As we talked about already, TCFD's work has culminated and ISSB has assumed responsibility for that work. But there are differences between the two, even though they're very closely aligned. So the first main difference actually is that the ISSB standards require disclosure of all sustainability information, not just climate. The second thing is that S2 it uses different wording, but to capture the same information as the TCFD recommendations. S2 requires more detailed information than TCFD. So things like this would be, they might require more information about the way in which carbon credits are used to satisfy targets. And thirdly, there are some additional requirements and guidance in S2, in particular, the requirement to use sector-specific standards we're going to be talking about later. So the ISSB's main objective was to set a global baseline for sustainability information. And that global baseline provides a common language for the provision of sustainability information, so it enables comparable and consistent sustainability disclosure across global capital markets. And the foundation is working with jurisdictions around the world to achieve this through their regulatory adoption program. However, they know that in addition to the global baseline, regulators and stock exchanges around the world might require information in addition to the global baseline, and those jurisdictions and others can add additional building blocks or information requirements tailored to the needs of particular stock exchanges or jurisdictions or others. And those additional disclosures represented by additional building blocks can be required as long as the information is presented in a way that does not obscure the disclosures required by the global baseline set within the ISSB standards. So what could a building block be to add to the global baseline? Well, it could be requiring information of such as the GRI standards require, or jurisdiction-specific information relevant to investors in a particular jurisdiction. So taking this building block approaches reduces the need to duplicate information by having a globally consistent baseline of disclosures while still allowing jurisdictions and companies to report additional information based on things like the GRI standards. There's global backing for this global baseline approach. The baseline, as I said, is represented in the ISSB standards launched in 2023. The International Organization of Securities Commissions has announced its endorsement of ISSB standards and asked their 130 members how they can incorporate the standards into their regulatory framework. There are a new audit standard set by the International Auditing and Assurance Standards Board to enhance disclosure through assurance practice. As I mentioned, there's a regulatory implementation program hosted by the IFRS Foundation to support jurisdictions in planning and preparation for voluntary and mandatory adoption of the ISSB standards. And of course, there are activities like this training session today to support market participants who are planning to support voluntary disclosure against the new ISSB standards. So our colleague Bella is now going to start to explain the ISSB standards to us. Over to you, Bella.
Thank you so much, Lois. Okay, so now let's move to IFRS 1 and IFRS 2. We talked about the business case and the market case for sustainability reporting, the evolution of the landscape, and how it is being simplified and rationalized. Now let's introduce IFRS 1 and IFRS 2. Okay. As we start, it's important to note that there are some key terms that should be understood. You can find the definitions in your handout, but I wanted to briefly mention them here. First of all, we will be saying the phrase sustainability-related financial information quite a lot. This can refer to a broad set of issues, including climate, nature, or biodiversity, human, social, or others. In terms of sustainability-related financial information, it is information about a company's sustainability-related risks and opportunities that is useful to investors in making decisions about providing resources to the company. And what do we mean by sustainability-related risks and opportunities? They are risks and opportunities that could reasonably be expected to affect the company's cash flows, access to finance, or cost of capital. It could affect the company's prospects. And we will also often refer to general purpose financial reports, which includes a company's financial statements and the management commentary. You might know this as a management report, management review, or strategic report. Some regulators require specific disclosures in certain parts of general purpose financial reports, so we use this generic phrase throughout. Okay, so anyone familiar with TCFD will recognize the same 4 core pillars or content areas for the SSB standards. These are governance, strategy, risk management, and the metrics and targets. For each core content area, there are a set of key disclosures to be addressed, and the standards provide very detailed guidance on these requirements. We will discuss each of the 4 content areas today, but I encourage you to download the standards as part of your homework assignment. Okay, so let's start with IFRS S1. I'll give it its full title, General Requirements for Disclosure of Sustainability-Related Financial Information. IFRS S1 sets out general requirements for the content and presentation of sustainability-related risks and opportunities. If you are familiar with TCFD, you will see the same architecture applied throughout the standards. And S1 also asks preparers to refer to and consider the applicability of the SASB standards and the other sources of further guidance to identify sustainability-related risks and opportunities and identify material information. The SASB standards are organized by industry, enabling a company to identify disclosure topics and metrics applicable to its business model and operations. So finally, the standards can be used in conjunction with any accounting requirements. The scope of S1 is all sustainability topics except for climate, which is covered by S2. So the second standard, S2, focuses on climate disclosures, building on the same foundations of S1. For example, it fully incorporates the recommendations of TCFD, and it sets out the requirements for a company to disclose material information about its climate-related risks and opportunities. And also it requires the disclosure of both cross-industry and industry-specific information. In terms of climate-related risks, these include both physical and transition risk, which we will come back to later. And other specific climate-related disclosures are required, for example, on scenario analysis and GHG emissions. Preparers must also refer to and consider the applicability of the industry-based guidance on implementing IFRS S2. As we've already said, this is organized by industry, enabling a company to identify climate-related disclosure topics and metrics applicable to its business model and operations. So it's important to note that S1 and S2 are not stand-alone standards. They are a package and must be applied together. Even when a company is reporting only on climate-related risks and opportunities, the company must apply both IFRS S1 and S2. This is because IFRS S1 sets out general requirements or parameters for the type of information that needs to be provided in order to be decision useful for investors. S1 also explains the concept of materiality and how companies identify material sustainability-related financial information. Okay, so now let's consider some of the conceptual foundations that underpin the SSB standards, which might be new to anyone without an accounting background. These concepts help us to understand how best to disclose information in order to meet the requirements of the standards. So to start with, companies must fairly present a complete set of sustainability-related risks and opportunities. Fair presentation also requires disclosures to be faithfully represented. To achieve this, companies shall provide a complete, neutral, and accurate depiction of sustainability-related risks and opportunities. The reporting entity concept requires the organizational boundary for sustainability-related financial disclosures and financial statements to be the same. Another important concept is connected information. We saw earlier when Fiona explained how different risks are often interconnected. The SSB standards require companies to clearly identify key connections, such as those between risks and opportunities, connections between the four content areas, and connections between sustainability-related financial disclosures and the main financial statements. So now it's time for our real-life cases. Over to you, Lois.
Thank you, Bella. Yes, and as this is our first example today from a real-life company, I just want to repeat the disclaimer that Fiona gave earlier, that we show you these examples to illustrate and to inspire, but not to imply that they are good or best practice. They're just examples of how companies respond to particular things. So this example is from the 2024 annual report of a company called BHP, which is a large mining company. It's part of their disclosure on how they manage climate-related risk and their plans to transition to a net zero economy. So in this extract, the company describes its climate-related risk assessment and climate scenario analysis processes and their impact on the business and capital allocation plans. But this example is primarily to illustrate what Bella was just saying about the principle of connected information that we see in the IFRS sustainability disclosure standards. So what connections and connected information do we see in this extract? Well, in the first paragraph, the company tells us that the climate risk assessments and climate scenario analysis are integrated into the company's strategy and treated as a sensitivity in their capital allocation process. So they're not treated as separate. The climate risk assessment and scenario analysis are connected to and integrated with the company's strategy and capital allocation process. In the second paragraph, we can see that there are some assessments that are still in progress. So the company's undertaking studies to assess the effect of future physical climate-related risks on the company's operations, productivities and costs. When the results are in, they will be used to inform and therefore connect with the company's risk profile, corporate planning, controls and adaptation measures. So the light grey text at the bottom of the screen shows connections to further information on the impacts of climate-related risks on operational activities, greenhouse gas emissions across the value chain, financial statements and production, revenue and expenditure. So an example here that shows us about how climate risk and climate scenario analysis is integrated into the company's decision-making and processes. Back to you, Bella.
Thank you, Lois. Okay. So I hope all of you have a sense of what is connection and what is connected information. And it's time for a Zoom poll. It's kind of a test to check who understood it. Okay. So it's going to launch the Zoom poll version. Yeah. Okay, so the question is what information should be considered for connected information? And just remember that you should select all that apply. Yeah. So is it connections between governance strategy, risk management, and the metrics and targets, or connections between sustainability-related financial disclosures and the financial statements, or connections between sustainability-related risks and opportunities? Yeah, so I'm going to give you a few more seconds to get more participation. Okay, so I'm going to end the poll and share the results now. Yeah, as you can see from the results that 63% choose A and 30% choose B and 58% choose C. Well, the correct answer is all of them are correct. Remember that what I said earlier, there are three aspects in terms of connections. So we should ensure that all the three aspects should be connected. Okay, well done. And let's continue. Okay, the standards are built on the concept of materiality as defined by the IFRS Foundation. We are going to go into this in more detail later, but just to highlight that we will be referring today to material information, which is information that if omitted, misstated, or obscured could reasonably be expected to affect investor decision-making. During the ISSB consultation on the exposure drafts, one of the key feedback topics was the importance of supporting preparers, particularly those with more limited resources and those in emerging markets. In addition to the standards and the application guidance published in 2023, a number of educational resources were also published, and since then others have followed, including the IFRS Knowledge Hub. We are also in the process of gathering examples and case studies provided by our partners. The SASB standards are aligned with IFRS S2 to help preparers seeking industry-based guidance, and the FIC credential was also updated with more planned to come. I should also note that the IFRS Foundation's capacity building program, which was launched at COP27, is a key part of our support to preparers, and the SSE training initiative is one of our most important deliverables. Okay, so there is another Zoom poll to test what you have learned so far. Okay, the question is, water is a vital input to your business, but the ISSB standards do not currently have a specific standard on water. And what do you do? Okay. So option A is do not disclose anything about water. Option B, consult the sources of guidance listed by ISSB. Option C is engage a consultancy to help. Option D is copy your competitors' reporting. Okay, so let's wait for a few more seconds. So I'm going to end the Zoom poll now and share the results. Well, yes, you can tell from the results that well done. Most of you have choose the correct answer, which is option B. Consult the sources of guidance listed by SSB, and we have 71% doing the correct answer. Yes, as I mentioned earlier, that IFRS 1 sets out requirements on the listed resources and guidance that can refer to and consider when preparing reports in accordance with the ISSB standards, especially when some theme standards like water-related standards is not currently available. And obviously, option A is not correct. As you can tell from the question that water is a vital input to your business, which means water-related information should be considered as material information. So option A is not correct. And I think some of you may think option C and option D is helpful. Yes, engage a consultancy to help, and also copy your competitors' reporting also can be seen a good start point for you. But for this question, there is only one correct answer. So the answer is option B. Okay, so let's continue. I think it's time for you, Fiona, to do the module summary.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Bella. And as you say, that brings us to the end of our first module. So I'm just going to do a little bit of a wrap up on this module and a few takeaways on what we've covered so far. So to start with, we reviewed the purpose of sustainability related disclosures. And a key takeaway I'm hoping you'll leave this workshop with is that there are important benefits, both internally and externally, for collecting and disclosing sustainability related financial information. So ultimately, if you're not aiming to make good use of this data that you're collecting to improve your own organizational decision making and strategy, then you're going about this wrong and you're wasting time, really. So if you also have operations in hard to abate or high impact sectors, it could already be the case that your investors are looking at your competitors' reporting and seeing them disclosing risks and identifying opportunities that they're pursuing. And that's going to leave the investors wondering why you're not doing the same thing and might ultimately start to affect your ability to raise funds in the longer term. We then looked at the evolution of the disclosure standards and the formation of the ISSB with its aim to simplify the landscape. So when you're thinking about disclosures and voluntary ones that you might make alongside ISSB reporting, you shouldn't see them as competing with these standards, but rather building on top of them. And finally, we introduce the standards and the important concepts that you need in order to understand and use them correctly. And a key point I want to reiterate here is that these standards and the guidance that come with them are designed to meet the needs of investors. And therefore, they're heavily focused on the prospects that we discussed at the start of this unit relating to financial effects on position and performance and those different risks and opportunities. Okay, so that's just a quick summary, and we're going to now move back to Menti for a quick exercise to wrap up the module. So we try to have one of these at the end of each module just to really help you to reflect on what we've covered so far. So the first area we want to reflect on is around defining the objectives of your sustainability disclosures. So I think we've heard and established in this module that there are a lot of different reasons by which you might be reporting, but being clear on what you're trying to achieve through your disclosures is definitely a helpful thing to start with at outset. So this could include defining any particular reporting requirements, such as alignment to ISSB, that you're seeking to meet, or maybe you're looking to meet the needs of a particular stakeholder group. And also here, you might want to be looking to set the ambition in terms of the direction of travel and the level of change that you need from where you are now. So maybe this is a completely new thing for your organization, so you have to implement a lot, or maybe it's around small additions to your current disclosures to align with these requirements if you're further advanced. So I thought it'd just be helpful just to take a moment together to reflect on our own objectives So if you're going to go back to Menti at the link which we've shared again with you in the chat there, or hopefully maybe you already still have it open, our question for you is, what objective are you aiming to achieve through your sustainability disclosures? And as well, if you have looked at our homework handout, the structure of the Menti exercises now aligns to those same areas that we kind of think are core to this disclosure plan. So the aim of these exercises is just to help you start thinking about them. So there's no right or wrong answers or particular level of detail that you need to have here. It's really just, what's your immediate reflection on these points as we're working through, just to help you to take a moment to step back on that. So I'll give everyone a second to have a think about that, and we can have a little look at some of your responses together once you've been able to input those. Okay. See a few people getting their responses in, which is good. I'll give you all another moment or two just to have a little think. We do really encourage the participation, so do make sure to find Menti if you haven't done already. It's always nice to know what everyone thinks about these things, because everyone's perspective is quite different, and it's always useful to see how that varies. Maybe there'll be aspects that you could highlight that haven't been thought of already, or just a different way of framing it, which can be helpful for everyone. Okay, so I see a few responses coming through, which is great. So someone here has mentioned around reducing their carbon footprint and improving their sustainability practices. So yes, that sounds like a great ethos in terms of aiming to implement things internally and realize the benefits of it alongside just, not just reporting things outside as well. We've then got around reflecting different impacts of our company. Okay, so that's kind of the impact kind of lens on things. And I guess we'd encourage you as well to think about those risks and opportunities to your business from those issues as well with these standards, which is good. And then I see a few people mentioning sort of financial stability and resilience. Yes, exactly. So either the stability of your own organization, maybe you are a financial institution or are reliant on that, and of course we can all contribute as well to improved resilience if we could each address this topic together. And then being part of the club, I like that. Lending sustainable loans from international financial institutions. Yeah, so maybe accessing lending suitable loans, sorry, not sustainable loans, but maybe accessing that capital that would be aligned to particular criteria here. So complying with regulatory requirements, meeting investor needs. I see transparency, meeting the goals to bring about more impact. See why, there we go. Wasn't letting me scroll. I could see there was lots more answers coming in, which is great. So we have being fully transparent about the positive and negative impacts of a company, helping to prioritize these areas. Indeed, so getting a sense of everything that matters, but really then also demonstrating what the focus and material issues are. Improving quality and complying with global trends, maybe thinking about your reputation, mentioning access to financing again, speak the same language as investors, translating our ESG performance into clear business risks and opportunities. Yes, I think that's a really nice way to frame it. Reducing our footprint, thinking about risk management as well, improving efficiency, being transparent, reputation. Brilliant. No, thank you, everyone. I think lots of good thinking there. And I think already shows both that understanding that we all have that there's a lot more to gain from this than just reporting, but equally, being transparent is fundamental here as well. But that actually implementing these things can do a lot more for your business as well. So although we might not equally prioritize all of these areas, I think getting clear on, the top and immediate focus for your organization can be good framing for then how you're going to develop this plan to take forward the standards. So I think, as you've highlighted here, we just really recommend thinking about the audience for your reporting. In this case, it may well be your investor audience, and maybe any particular feedback you've had from your investors before that could inform how you might need to change your sustainability disclosures. And making sure to really look to the future as well. So whereas, reporting requirements possibly are not yet fully mandated, if we can see that direction of travel, that will be happening in time, it's good to look and plan for that future state as well. Okay, thank you everyone. That's brilliant. We'll go back now to the presentation, and I'm handing over, I believe, to Bella for the next segment.
Thank you, Fiona. Okay. Okay, now let's move to module 2. We have introduced the initial concepts. Let's dive into how to apply the SSB standards, taking into account additional disclosures, including any relevant geographical or sectorial requirements, as well as peer practices and your leadership's objectives. So, in order to understand how to ensure your disclosures meet global standards, we will look at 2 key concepts in this unit. The first and the main focus of this unit will be on how to apply the standards to achieve a global baseline for disclosure. Once we cover that, we will also discuss how additional disclosures fit. And to begin, let's focus first on how to apply the SSB standards as the global baseline. Okay, so let's start on the first core content, governance. This includes aspects that relate to the governance body in your company and how management is applied. Okay. So for each of the core content areas, we will discuss questions that you could ask in your company to start identifying the information that will support some of the disclosure requirements. For example, as part of gap analysis. So if we look at the governance of and the management requirements, we can see that there are several questions that you can ask internally. For example, which bodies are responsible for the oversight and the management of processes, controls, and the procedures of sustainability-related risks and opportunities? And also, you can ask, is management responsibility delegated to a specific role or committee? And also, we can ask, how and when do they get informed about sustainability-related risks and opportunities? How these issues inform strategy, decision-making, and risk management. This could include setting targets to manage sustainability-related risks and opportunities. And finally, whether progress against these targets links to executive remuneration. For more information, you can make use of SSE checklist tool, but remember, it's not a replacement for reading and using the full SSB standards. Okay, so I think it's time for an example. Over to you, Lois.
Thank you, Bella. Yes, now this example of governance disclosure is from a company called Yara, which is a global crop nutrition company with 17,000 employees operating in 60 countries. So in this governance model example, we can see that Yara's got a highly integrated model with responsibilities for sustainability embedded across lots of different business functions. You can see those right in the middle of the screen in the pale green boxes. And these include risk management, health and safety, environment and quality, human resources, and global climate and energy. So the sustainability governance is shown across those business units in the pale green boxes in the middle. You can see that the sustainability governance team reports into the chief financial officer. So that's their reporting line. So the sustainability governance team and the CFO are responsible for sustainability performance and reporting. And one of the things that Bella just mentioned in her list about the sorts of information that should be applied is how information flows between the company and governance bodies. And here you can see that arrows are used to show how information flows, but also where there is oversight and reporting lines and competencies to support sustainability disclosure. Right near the bottom of the screen, we can see that a sustainability network from right across the business, lots of different representatives are involved. They feed into the sustainability governance team as well. So this is just one example of a governance model. The standard doesn't set out what your governance model should look like, only the information you should supply. So let's have a look at another example to see something slightly different. And this is an example from Toyota Industries 2024 annual report. I'm sure, as you all know, Toyota is a car manufacturer, including of hybrid electric vehicles. And in this extract, they explain the role of the Sustainability Committee. And this is one of the business execution committees that reports direct to the president and the board of directors. So the extract shows the frequency with which this committee meets, that's once a year or as necessary. It shows the chairperson. In this case, it's the executive in charge of enterprise risk and compliance management. So different to the Yara example we saw where the reporting line was to the CFO. The extract shows who are the members of this committee. So again, like Yara, you get cross-functional members from different departments, administrative, business divisions, senior technical executives, audit and supervisory board members, so a range of different expertise. They're reporting into the Enterprise Risk and Compliance Management Department. And we also see at the end the agenda. So what does this committee actually do? They approve action plans on sustainability, targets, and they evaluate activity results. They determine the approach to sustainability, taking into account the opinions of stakeholders and social trends. And they revise the sustainability policy. And in the report itself, you can find a QR code that links to their sustainability policy. So over to you, Fiona, for the next section, please.
Great, thank you, Lois. And so now, hopefully, with those examples making governance fairly clear, we're going to look at the next core content area, which is strategy. So strategy does have a fair few more disclosures to include than governance, but it's also really where companies can see the benefits from sustainability-related risks and opportunities and being prepared for those issues. So as you can see here, there are three high-level areas that we focus on in this content area, and these are risks and opportunities, effects, and resilience. So we'll review each of these in turn. So in IFRS S1 and S2, the disclosure requirements on strategy are all designed around understanding of companies' strategy for managing sustainability-related risks and opportunities. So if we're first looking at the requirements relating to the risks and opportunities side, these are some of the questions that you'll want to ask internally. So when you're disclosing information about risks, information required includes a description of the effects, the time horizon under which those effects are expected. And here that's where we need to keep in mind that point we mentioned at the start, that financial effects could occur before a risk or opportunity materializes, maybe after, or they could change over time as well. And the last two questions on this list in particular look at climate, so they align with the requirements from S2. And for example, investors also want to understand what types of risks and opportunities have been identified. And here is where we often see companies using the categories that have already been identified in the TCFD. So that's physical and transition risk, which we'll talk about in a bit more detail later. But both standards also include guidance to support companies here in identifying and disclosing risks and opportunities. And they recommend the use of industry-based guidance and the SASB standards as well. So we know often an example can help put this into practice again. So we'll start with a few here. So I'll highlight from this example in particular aspects around the risk identification side, but of course, I think it's relevant for the whole aspect of the strategy pillar that we're talking about as well. So the example that we have here is from Mondi Group's integrated report. So Mondi Group is a packaging and paper group company with operations across Europe, North America, and Africa. And on the left-hand side here, we can see that they've identified the risks the company faces and how these risks align with 4 key categories across strategic, financial, operational, and compliance risk. They also have a delegated risk owner for each risk, and they've highlighted as well how each risk connects to different aspects of their strategy and their sort of core priorities. And then on the right-hand side, we see nested within the strategic risk of climate change, they've unpicked a number of the specific climate risks that they potentially are exposed to as well, using that physical and transition types from the TCFD. And as well as showing the identification of these risks, they also go on to provide more detail here about the financial impact of the risks, their time horizons, etc. So something you can look at in a bit more detail if you click on the report in the handout, but we'll just highlight in particular at this point that it's a nice clear way to set out an example of how they've identified these different types of risks and how they connect to the overall business strategy. So another aspect of the risks and opportunities identification that you'll need to disclose brings us back to what we discussed about at the beginning, which is all around time and time horizons. So you might remember that we talked about time being potentially something that can be quite different when we're talking about sustainability related disclosures. So let's try to be clear here on what we mean by time horizons. So in the standards, you're asked to identify within what time horizon any material effects are expected to occur. And how you define short, medium, and long-term horizons can vary between companies and depend on a number of different factors. So, for example, the investment and business planning cycles of your organization, the strategic planning horizons and how you allocate capital, maybe the lifespan of the assets that you own or operate, or the assessment periods that your investors are using as well. So overall, you will need to select time horizons which make sense for your own organization's factors and which align with your own risk management processes. But what's important to remember here is that you should be defining the time horizons. So don't expect that investors will necessarily know what you mean by short term, medium term, etc., unless you've provided a quantitative definition for that. So moving on now to the second group of disclosures in strategy. The first section there was all around identifying the risks and opportunities that could be reasonably expected to affect the company's prospects. And then here we're thinking about exactly what are those effects and where do they occur within the business. So to start tackling the disclosure requirements of the standards, companies might want to start asking themselves questions such as beginning to describe what the effects are, understanding what their response plan is for mitigating or adapting to the effects they've identified. And again, we know an example could help here. So we just got a brief one to show you. So this example comes from the global chemical producer BASF's annual report. And here we just want to highlight, it's quite high level. It's followed up with more detail in the report as ever. We always just try and summarize a few things on the slide from the report, but always best to go away and read the detail if you want to know more. But I think what we like from the example here from BASF is that they've really showed how different sustainability risks and opportunities are integrated and impact upon different aspects of their value chain. So they illustrate some of the projects that form part of their sustainability strategy, which they call winning ways. And this strategy includes supplying customers with products that contribute to sustainability through the use or reduce of carbon footprint. And the company is prioritizing projects where they see rising demand from customers and a willingness to pay more for sustainable products. And they're also undertaking transformation products that support the company's license to operate. So we can see in this disclosure that they reference both in their upstream what they're doing, they talk about their activities to improve their own operational resilience and efficiency, And they also then think about how they're kind of dealing with the use of products and the circular economy aspects relating to their downstream activities as well. And alongside this, they sort of talk around their targets in terms of generating more sales revenue by 2030 from sustainable opportunities. So it's kind of really illustrating that these effects, I suppose, from the risks and opportunities are really integrated into what they're thinking about long term for their business's strategy. So sometimes we know that one of the obstacles that companies face when they're reporting on these effects is the detail that might need to be disclosed. And in that example we just saw from BASF, they were showing mostly qualitative information in that summary I provided and descriptions. But what about quantitative disclosures? So a company is required to disclose both quantitative and quantitative information under the IFRS standards about the current and anticipated financial effects of sustainability risks and opportunities. However, the standards do also provide some criteria for when only qualitative information is required. So this could be the case if a company can't separate the effects of a climate-related risk or opportunity from other effects. So it isn't possible to isolate what that specific financial effect is from other issues. Also, if there's too high of a degree of measurement uncertainty to be able to provide any information on the quantitative front. Or finally, if the company itself doesn't currently have the skills, the capabilities, or resources to provide that quantitative information. So a few criteria there that could be considered. And so now we come to the last part of the strategy component. The first part there, of course, was the identifying the risks. The second part was the effects. And now this group of disclosures looks particularly at how the company is preparing for uncertainties and ensuring its resilience into the future. And this really gets into the practices and processes that a company has in place to assess its own resilience and make strategic adjustments where it needs to. So disclosures here include information on the types of assessment that have been used and how scenario analysis has been employed. And at the heart of it, the resilience disclosure requirements are asking the company to assess its resilience to climate change and to report the inputs and key assumptions that they've used to do that. So we're going to dive deeper into scenario analysis in a moment, but some of the questions that you could consider asking internally when you're starting to disclose this information will be focused on your company's capacity to react or adjust when uncertainties arise. So fundamentally, if you've identified a risk or opportunity, do you think that's something that you could respond to? What are the unknowns here that you might need to explore further? And so let's take a look at a couple of examples now of how that's being disclosed in practice. So here we have an example from Stora Enso, which is a Finnish and Swedish forests product company. And in this diagram that we have on the screen, they're showing us what their sales potentially are going to look like up to 2030 from the strategic growth areas they've identified. So Stora Enso distinguishes between its essential and its growth businesses. And we don't have the detail of the numbers here, but we do have a kind of an estimation of the overall percentage of their sales they're expecting to come from these growth areas in the future. And what we kind of see here is that they're expecting to actually shift away from the more traditional business that they have today into these new areas. And so this really gives a sense of how they are today planning the actions that they need to take to increase their resilience by sort of potentially offsetting that loss of revenue from traditional business areas by growing the opportunity in new parts of the business. And they speak within the disclosure alongside these diagrams about the investments that they're making to achieve that. And so another example we have here is from Solvay, which is a Belgian chemicals company. And here we're just using this example to illustrate how they've reported on financial effects. I know the text can get a bit small when we're getting into that sort of detail, so I'll just highlight some of the key points, but again, probably worth reading in your own time if you'd like to know more. So they're quite transparent in their reporting about the estimates that they use, and they note the particular assumptions that go into their scenario analysis tool. So as we've highlighted, if you're using scenario analysis, it can be very helpful, but you need to be clear about how you've employed it. And you can see they've indicated which scenarios they've employed, which parts of the business they've focused on, and they've also highlighted who was involved in that assessment as well. And then in the second aspect of the disclosure in that table at the bottom, they've highlighted the financial impacts that they're expecting to see across different areas of the risks and opportunities. So helping to really illustrate which aspects and trends are the ones that are going to have impacts for them. So they do this under two different climate scenarios on the right-hand side, and they use a sort of qualitative scale from -3 to +3 to indicate the potential direction and the magnitude of the financial effect from these different transition risks. So it's sort of a semi-quantitative approach, I suppose, where they've put numerical values against it, but a sort of allowing for some of the uncertainty they might still have in measuring these financial impacts. Okay, and that brings us back to just a quick test on one of the points that I've highlighted there that we wanted just to see whether you had you'd taken away an understanding on, which was to check. So a company can choose to disclose only qualitative information and or combined quantitative information about current and anticipated financial effects when. And you can have a read and select as many of these answers here as you think are valid criteria for when you might disclose qualitative information or a mix of qualitative and quantitative. I'll give you a second to read those over and let us know which ones you think are correct. Okay, I see the responses slowly coming through. I'll give you another few seconds. I know there's a bit of reading involved to get your head around some of these questions, so no problem. Maybe give you 5 more seconds. Okay, let's share those results then. So we see that I think most of you are correct here. Indeed, those top 2 options are both valid reasons. So either if you can't separate climate effects from risks and opportunities from other effects, or if there is too much measurement uncertainty to be able to report financial quantitative information. However, as most of you correctly identified, the third option there about when it sheds a negative light on the company is not a valid criteria for not disclosing quantitative information. Of course, it's important to be balanced and transparent in our reporting. So if we do have information that suggests there could be potentially material negative impacts, then it's important that we're transparent about that. And indeed, in all of those examples that I shared there on the strategy segment, I think you'll be able to see that coming through in those companies' disclosures, that they have provided balance on both the negative impacts on risk and the positive financial benefits from opportunity as well. Brilliant. Okay, I think that brings me to the end of this segment, and back over to you, Lois.
Thank you, Fiona. And now we're going to look at climate-specific considerations in the context of the strategy core component of the recommendations. When we looked at governance, the governance requirements in S1 and S2 are very similar. There are no specific additional requirements for climate in the governance core component. But when we're looking at strategy, there are some additional climate-specific considerations, and we're going to look at those now. Now, the title of this slide, From TCFD to ISSB, is really aimed at people who are already using TCFD, but the list we're going to go through applies to everybody regardless of whether they're using TCFD. So the disclosure requirements in S2 say that a company, when making its climate disclosures, is required to refer to and consider the applicability of industry-based topics. Now, these are set out in the industry-based guidance on identifying climate-related risks and opportunities, and that document is available on the IFRS website. These industry-based disclosure topics are based on SASB standards, which we know some of you are familiar with, and they'll ask things specific to a sector. So, for example, if you're in the personal products industry, they'll ask whether you're using certain palm oil products and where they're sourced from, so specific to your industry. S2 also requires detailed information on where in a company's business model and value chain risks and opportunities are concentrated. So, for example, this might be where you know that weather events make a particular physical asset vulnerable to climate risk. Thirdly, in describing the effects of climate-related risks and opportunities, S2 requires disclosure about how a company has responded to and plans to respond to the effects of climate-related risks and opportunities. So this might be that the company has set climate-related targets it wishes to achieve, or that it has prepared a transition plan. We're going to look at climate transition plans in a moment. Next, in providing disclosures about the current and anticipated effects of climate-related risks and opportunities on a company's financial position, financial performance and cash flows, S2 sets out criteria for when quantitative and qualitative information is required. Ideally, quantitative information will always be provided. However, recognizing that this can be difficult, the standard sets out when qualitative information only is permitted in some circumstances. For example, where a company can't separately identify the effect of climate risk from other types of risk and opportunity, or when the level of measurement uncertainty involved is so high that it would make the resulting quantitative information not useful. So when preparing disclosures on the anticipated financial effects of climate-related risks and opportunities, S2 only requires a company to use all reasonable and supportable information available to it at the reporting date without undue cost and effort, and to use an approach that is commensurate with the company's circumstances. We're going to come back to this phrase later, but really it's trying to make things easier for companies on reporting their anticipated financial effects of climate-related risks. Then the penultimate point is about scenario analysis, and S2 requires a company to use scenario analysis when assessing its resilience to climate-related risk and opportunity. But bear in mind that S2 does not specify the particular scenario that should be used for that resilience assessment. That is for the company to decide. And finally, S2 requires information about the company's resilience assessment, how resilient the business model and strategy is to climate-related risk and opportunity. And they include things like, were there any significant areas of uncertainty considered by the company in its assessment? How is the company's capacity to adjust and adapt its strategy and business model over time to enhance or remain resilient? And of course, the standard asks for details of how and when climate scenario analysis was carried out. Now, I just mentioned that one of the responses a company might have to the effects of climate-related risk and opportunity on its business is to set a transition plan. Now, there's nothing in IFRS S2 that requires a company to have a transition plan, but if it does, then certain information must be supplied about it. First of all, let's look at the definition of transition plan. A transition plan is an aspect of the company's overall strategy that includes targets, actions, or resources for the transition towards a lower carbon economy, including, for example, greenhouse gas emissions reductions plans. So what should a transition plan be like? What should its characteristics be? Well, first of all, because it's an aspect of the company's overall strategy, it should align with the company's strategy, business case, and business motivation and decarbonisation levers that it can use most economically and technologically efficiently and feasibly for the company. Secondly, the transition plan should be aligned with science, including what science says about requirements for net zero to be achieved and how carbon neutrality or Paris Agreement aligned goals are explained in terms of the science. Thirdly, the transition plan should operate over a period of time and set long-term transition goals accordingly. And those transition goals should be supported by activities and targets to achieve those goals and interim targets to monitor progress against the long-term goals. And of course, information about these things should be disclosed. The transition is uncertain. Nobody can be quite certain how it will unfold. So the transition plan should be transparent about the dependencies for the plan's progress and success, including any risks and challenges the company anticipates for implementing and achieving the plan, and information about how residual and unabated greenhouse gas emissions will be treated. As we've said, the transition is uncertain. Nobody knows how it will proceed, but sector-specific pathways can be helpful to look at because the transition will proceed in different ways for different sectors. And we're going to look at some resources that might help with that in a moment. And finally, companies should consider how the transition plan will be evaluated by investors and others and ensure that it has the hallmarks of credibility, which are set out in various frameworks and guidances. Let's have a look at some transition plan resources now. Well, there are a lot of transition plan resources, and we can only show you very, very few of them here. But to get started with, the triangle on the left-hand side of the screen shows the IFRS sustainability disclosure standards at the bottom, which set out the requirement to disclose information about a transition plan if a company has one. But above that, we see resources offered by GFANS, which is the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero. And in the middle, you can see 3 resources that have been developed by GFANS, setting out expectations of transition plans for real economy companies and financial institutions, but also showing sector pathways for financial institutions and other sectors. So GFANS appears in the triangle in the middle because it is designed to be used by companies to support their sustainability disclosures. At the top of the triangle, we have the work of the Transition Plan Task Force, which, as we said earlier, is now the responsibility in terms of the disclosure materials of the IFRS Foundation. And their Transition Plan Pathway Disclosure Framework is another resource that supports transition planning and disclosure according to the ISSB standards. So you'll be pleased to hear that we're halfway through our session today. So we're going to take a quick break, just 5 minutes. We'll play you some relaxing music. Please take the opportunity to have a stretch, get a drink, and also think of any questions you'd like to ask us, and please put them in the question and answer box. So have a good break, everyone. See you back here in 5 minutes. Hello, everyone. Welcome back from the break. Hope you had a chance to stretch and have a drink, and that you're ready to move on to the next core content area, which is about risk management. So this category of disclosures requires report preparers to disclose information about the processes they use for risk management of sustainability-related risks and opportunities, as well as how those processes fit within their overall risk profile and enterprise risk management systems. So the sorts of questions you might want to ask yourself as you approach this disclosure area are: what processes and policies are being used within the company to identify, assess, prioritize, and monitor sustainability-related risks and opportunities? And how are those processes integrated into the company's overall risk process? So as when we talked about the strategy content area, the disclosure requirements ask you to provide information about the sustainability related risks and opportunities that you've identified, those that could reasonably be expected to affect the company's prospects. But this core content area asks for disclosures about the processes and related policies the company has for risk management. The good news is that most companies will have a process in place, so you won't need to hopefully invent anything from the outset, but can use the processes you already have, possibly with some adaptations. So the sorts of questions you might ask within this are: what sort of criteria you use for sustainability related risk and opportunity prioritization within your risk management systems, and whether they're suitable for sustainability related risks and opportunities. So let's have a look now at some of the climate specific considerations relating to risk management. So the risk management requirements apply across S1 and S2, but when we get to S2, there are some specific climate related considerations, and we'll look at them now. So again, this is entitled TCFD to ISSB, but these points apply to people even if you haven't used TCFD. So S2 asks for information about the input parameters used to identify risks, whether and how climate scenario analysis is used to inform risk identification, and whether and how risk management processes have changed. So these will all sort of be features of your risk management processes, and the same applies to opportunities. Within IFRS S2, we have a definition of climate-related risks, and this is taken from the TCFD's work. So there are two types of climate-related risks. Transition risks arise from efforts to transition to a lower carbon economy, and they're often categorized as policy and legal, technological, market, and reputational risks. Now we have some examples of these in the middle of the screen. They could be things like increased pricing of greenhouse gas emissions, enhanced reporting obligations, exposure to litigation, costs associated with the transition to lower emission technologies, responding to changing customer behavior, uncertainty perhaps in market signals about the transition, increased cost or availability of raw materials, and perhaps stigmatization of some whole sectors. The second type of risk is physical risks, and they in turn can be acute, which are event-driven from weather-related events such as storms, floods, droughts, or heat waves, which are increasing in severity and frequency, or they can be chronic physical risks that arise from longer-term shifts in climatic patterns, including changes in rainfall and temperature, sea level rise, reduced water availability, biodiversity loss, and changes in soil productivity. Again, we see examples at the bottom of the middle column there. But in both cases, transition and financial risks can give rise to financial effects affecting the company's cash flows, its access to finance, its cost of capital, revenue, and so on. And those financial effects can be felt over the short, medium, or long term. They can come from things like direct damage to assets through physical risk, or indirect effects of supply chain disruption or changes in resource availability and cost. We also see a definition of climate-related opportunities in IFRS S2. Climate-related opportunities refer to the potential positive effects arising from climate change for a company. So these types of opportunities include becoming more resource efficient, finding energy sources that are less carbon intensive, innovating to produce new products and services that respond to climate change and changing consumer demands, perhaps accessing new markets, and using opportunities to enhance the company's resilience and differentiate against competitors. Again, these opportunities can give rise to financial effects over different timeframes, and perhaps those financial opportunities come from the development of new products and services that command consumer loyalty, for example. And we're going to look at the case now of a company called the RS Group. It's a UK-based distributor of electrical and industrial equipment. It has global operations, and this is from its 2024 report. Now, the RS Group, they've analysed their climate-related risks and opportunities for a number of years as part of their annual report disclosures. Elsewhere in the report, so not in this extract, in a other part of the report, the company's identified 10 principal risks, one of which is climate-related transition and physical risks to their business. And this extract describes some of the physical risks. The most significant physical climate risks relate to the impact of extreme heat on the company's distribution centres. And you can see that described on the first row there. So they anticipate increased costs associated with installation of high efficiency cooling systems, amongst other things. The second type of physical risk they identify is the impact of extreme weather on their distribution centres, and they describe that there in the second column, potentially giving rise to physical damage to their infrastructure. In the first column, you can also see with the little red wheels how the company links these physical risks to their strategic actions. So there's evidence of a connection there. But they also show the connection of each risk to their stakeholders, so which of their connected stakeholders are most affected. Further on in the columns, you can see who the business owner for each risk is, what the metrics the company uses to track and monitor each risk. And in the final column, there's information about the actions the company is taking to mitigate each of the risks. And these include things like building upgrades to withstand extreme weather risks and associated capital investments and business continuity planning. So we're going to hand over to Bella now for the next core content area.
Thank you, Lois. We will now spend some time reviewing the disclosure requirements on metrics and targets in more detail, the final core content area of the standards. Okay, let's start with metrics. Requirements on metrics are designed to enable investors to understand a company's performance in relation to its sustainability-related risks and opportunities. Preparers shall disclose information explaining how the metrics are defined, if they are absolute or relative, if they have been validated by a third party, as well as the methodology, what is the method of calculation, what were the inputs, and other limitations, and any assumptions are involved. So let's move to the second part of this category, targets. Requirements on targets are designed to enable investors to understand the targets a company has set to monitor progress towards achieving its strategic goals. So disclosures include whether they are qualitative or quantitative, and whether it is set voluntarily or by law or regulation. And also the metric used to set the target and to monitor progress towards its achievement. And disclosures also include the baseline period from which progress is measured and the period to which the target applies. What are the milestones and the interim targets? And also if there have been any revisions to the targets, together with an explanation about the revisions. So it's time for another example. Hand over to Lois.
Thanks, Bella. And this example is from a company called CLP, which is one of the largest investor-owned power businesses in Asia Pacific, and it aims to be a leading responsible power provider. And this is an extract from the company's 2024 sustainability report. Now, you'll probably have noticed that many of the examples we've given you relate to climate change, but this is an example about targets set to reduce waste and pollution. So the sustainability disclosure standards require information about all sustainability related risks and opportunities. And here CLP is showing us information about their targets on waste management and material use. They show us the metrics at the bottom of the page that they use for measuring it against the targets that they've set. The targets were set in 2021, that's the baseline, and the targets are there to support the company's circular economy strategy, which is described in the top first panel of this report. So when we get to the metrics, we can see in that pale grey text that they calculate the metrics in line with SASB and GRI frameworks. Then going to the metrics themselves, we can see that in many cases, the 2024 results show that 100% pollution reduction from the different categories that they list. The progress on the waste products, they show that too. They're slightly ahead of their target for 2024, 68 versus 65%, and that's because they have divested one of their assets. So in this example, you can see the baseline, you can see the target that was set, you can see the milestone at 2024 compared with the target which is due to be completed by the end of 2030. So over to you now, Bella, to take us through some climate-specific considerations.
Thank you, Lois. Yes, it's time for us to talk about some of the climate-specific considerations for disclosures on metrics and targets. Okay, so the TCFD framework included recommended disclosures, which IFRS S2 builds on and S2 as part of required disclosures. For example, IFRS S1 requires disclosure of industry-based metrics relevant to a company's business model and activities. And additional disclosures are required on GHG emissions, including separate disclosures for the consolidated accounting group and associated joint ventures, and the information about companies' financed emissions. In addition, IFRS S2 sets out the Scope 3 measurement framework to provide guidance for preparing Scope 3 GHG emissions disclosures. While IFRS S2 doesn't explicitly require a company to disaggregate its GHG emissions disclosures by the constituent gases, S1 includes requirements on disaggregation that would result in the disclosure of the constituent gases being required if such disaggregation provides material information. I'd like to remind everyone that you can access more information on climate metrics in the ICC training tool on this topic, We will share the link in the chat, and you can also find it on the IFRS website. Yeah. Likewise, there are some additional disclosures compared to TCFD for targets as well. For example, S2 requires disclosures about how the latest international agreement on climate change has informed the target and whether the target has been validated by a third party. And S2 also requires disclosure of more detailed information on GHG emissions targets, including additional information about any planned use of carbon credits to achieve a company's net GHG emissions targets. And S2 also includes additional requirements to disclose information about the approach to setting and reviewing each target, and how it monitors progress against each target, including whether the target was derived using a sectoral decarbonization approach. Questions on GHG emissions often come up in questions on metrics and targets disclosures, so we wanted to address some of this briefly. For those who might not be familiar with the different scopes, I'd like to briefly introduce the scope 1 includes all direct emissions that occur from sources owned or controlled by the company, such as emissions from your company's facilities or vehicles. And in terms of scope 2, which includes emissions from generation of acquired and consumed electricity, steam, heat and cooling, such as the electricity you purchase. And finally, scope 3 is all other indirect emissions that occur in the company's value chain. S2 requires a company to disclose its absolute gross scope 1, 2, 3 GHG emissions in accordance with the GHG protocol corporate standard, unless a jurisdiction requires a company to use a different approach to measurement. If a company is using a different measurement method, there is a transition relief to use that method in its first year of applying the standard. And the S2 requires a company to disclose whether and how the company is using an internal price on carbon for decision making, and whether and how executive remuneration is linked to climate change. So after introduction on the standards, it's time for another example. Over to you, Lois.
Thanks, Bella. And this is an example about disclosure of greenhouse gas emissions. It comes from a company called Enel, which is an Italian producer and distributor of electricity and gas. And it's from a report called their GHG inventory. And this gives lots and lots of information about their greenhouse gas emissions, but it starts with a description of the company's ambition and strategy to achieve net zero emissions by 2040 and to promote energy generation from renewable sources. So just trying to highlight that often with these examples, there is actually a connection with the company's strategy. At the top of the slide, you see the company's carbon footprint broken down by scopes 1, 2, and 3. In the shaded blue lines, you can see the 2022 base year, and in the dark blue graph bars, you can see the results for 2024. So this enables you to see that the highest source of greenhouse gas emissions comes from scope 3. It also enables you to see trends between 2022 and 2024, that there's a decline in greenhouse gas emissions, and we actually get shown the percentage decline in the example as well. At the bottom of the slide, we see an extract from a breakdown of the company's scope 2 greenhouse gas emissions, so showing how they disaggregate their scope 1 and 2 and 3 emissions. This is an extract from scope 2. The breakdown is by business activity, which we see in the first column. The business activity is power generation and others. The others are power distribution and estate management. They show us the source description. So scope 2 emissions come from electricity consumption from the grid in power plants and from electricity consumption from the grid in terminal ports in particular locations. Again, we see the comparison between the 2024 results and the 2022 baseline and the percentage reduction. We also see that there's a breakdown in the calculation method. Now, this applies only to scope 2 emissions. The location-based emission reflects average emissions intensity of the local electricity grid that the company is connected to, and the market-based method reflects emissions from electricity based on the contractual terms that the company has entered into with the electricity provider. That's just a small extract from their scope 2 emissions breakdown. So let's do a Zoom poll now about metrics and targets. And the question is, what is the objective of metrics? In particular, what is the objective of the IFRS sustainability disclosure requirements on metrics? You can select all that apply. Is the objective to enable report users to understand performance in relation to the company's sustainability-related risks and opportunities, to understand progress against any targets, and or to understand the company's assumptions for the future? I'll give you a minute to think about that. Quite a lot of rapid responses coming in now. In the interests of time, let's end the poll and I'll share the results with you. And the majority of you answered the first two. And you're right, you're correct. Now, those that said that metrics might help readers understand the company's assumptions for the future, you're right. But the reason for asking you the question in this way is that at the start of each of the core components in the ISSB standards, the objective of the disclosure requirements is set out. And in the case of metrics, the objective of the metrics requirements are to enable users to understand performance in relation to the company's sustainability-related risks and opportunities, and to understand progress towards any targets. So we've asked you this question to encourage you to read the standards, look at the objective of each of the disclosure requirements, because that will help you to craft your disclosures and decide what to disclose. So well done for that. Most of you got that correct. We're going to move on to the next module within the Align section. And this is about how to integrate other disclosure requirements, that is, in addition to those required by the global baseline that companies may be required to or want to comply with. So this section is really about how we build on the baseline that we talked about earlier. Why might you want to build on the baseline? Well, it could be because there are listing requirements that apply to you that go beyond the requirements in the global baseline, or because there are policy objectives in the jurisdictions in which you operate that may require information to enable you to benefit from tax cuts, from incentives to encourage sustainable practices or subsidies or similar. Companies might also want to provide additional disclosures to align with industry practices and standards about how sustainability-related risks and opportunities affect and are managed by their particular sector. And of course, companies might want to provide information to respond to stakeholders in addition to investors to ensure that they have comprehensive disclosures. So as we said earlier, the IFRS Foundation is working with jurisdictions to support the global baseline through the adoption of the ISSB standards in different jurisdictions. On the screen it says more than 20 have committed to using ISSB standards on a voluntary or mandatory basis, but I think that number is now closer to 30. For jurisdictions that are contemplating adoption of the standards on a voluntary or mandatory basis, there is a regulatory implementation program supported by the IFRS Foundation. And if you're interested in knowing more about this, you can go to the link that Fiona's just shared or that's in your pack that will give you information about ongoing consultations on adoption of the standards. So the ISSB knows that in addition to their standards, companies will be using other standards to support their sustainability disclosure. We've already talked about the fact that CDP has aligned its climate questionnaire with IFRS S2. The Greenhouse Gas Protocol is the standard that must be used according to IFRS S2 for the calculation of greenhouse gas emissions. The ISSB is working closely with the GHG Protocol team in terms of governance, but also they're actively engaged in updates to the GHG Protocol standard. We're going to talk about the work with the GRI in a moment. We've already talked about the fact that the Transition Plan Task Force disclosure specific materials are now the responsibility of the IFRS Foundation. And finally, the ISSB is committed to build on the recommendations of the task force on nature-related financial disclosures. So the idea here is that working with existing standard setters and framework providers, an interoperable and seamless reporting system is hopefully going to emerge. So we've talked a bit already about the arrangements between ISSB and GRI to work together. They're committed to jointly identifying and aligning common disclosures. They've already done a study on interoperability between their respective requirements on greenhouse gas emissions disclosures. You'll see on the left-hand side a mapping document, and Fiona's given you the link to it in the chat, and it shows that there's quite a high degree of overlap and similarity between the two. They have committed to deliver full interoperability on nature-related disclosures. So in the ISSB's project on biodiversity ecosystems and ecosystem services, they will be looking in detail at GRI's 101 biodiversity standard. And in terms of governance, the IFRS Foundation is a convening partner of GRI's Sustainability Innovation Lab in Singapore. Might not apply so much to this audience, but some of you may be aware that in Europe there is the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, and companies within scope must provide sustainability disclosures according to European sustainability reporting standards. And those standards ask for similar information to information required by IFRS sustainability disclosure standards. So again, the European standard setter EFRAG and ISSB have released guidance and studies on interoperability. They've studied the similarities and differences between their climate-related disclosure requirements and found a high degree of alignment. There are some differences, and one of them being because the European standards seek information for a wider stakeholder group than just investors. So the requirements ask for information about impacts of business activity, not just risks and opportunities to business. And the ISSB standards, they have some additional requirements, such as on financed emissions, although bear in mind that there's a consultation at the moment on perhaps making greenhouse gas emissions disclosures a bit more simplified in both of these standard setters. So let's have a quick look at integrated reporting. I think we saw at the beginning that some of you are using integrated reporting. The high-level message here is that integrated reporting can be used as a complementary tool with IFRS S1 and S2. So when used together, the ISSB standards and integrated reporting framework help companies provide a more holistic view of their value creation approaches. If you're interested, the document that's shown on the left-hand side is a getting started guide to how you can use integrated reporting to help with your sustainability disclosures to ISSB. It includes dedicated frequently asked questions, a mapping tool, and a getting started guide. But as those of you that are familiar with integrated reporting know, it's underpinned by integrated thinking, and there's lots of great resources on integrated thinking, which really enhances the quality of a company's governance. So let's do a Zoom poll on the sorts of things you should consider when preparing your disclosures. The question is, my disclosure objectives should consider, you can only choose one of these, the ISSB standards only, the ISSB standards and regulatory requirements, just regulatory requirements, or all of the above and other sources of guidance. So I can see that this audience knows the answer and has it correct. Of course, it's the last one. When you're considering your disclosures and your disclosure objectives, take account of the ISSB standards and regulatory requirements. Of course, anything that you are required to do, but you can take account of other sources of guidance to help you. We saw the CLP example earlier, didn't we, where they were using SASB and GRI standards to help calculate their waste management and pollution metrics. So well done, everybody got that correct. And we're going to hand over to Fiona now for a Module 2 summary.
Brilliant. Thank you, Lois. So as I said a while ago, just a reminder that Module 2 is the biggie. So we're well more than halfway through the content, but well done for all of the time and attention thus far. We know there's lots to cover in that area. So thanks to the team for taking us through it. So just to recap on some of the content areas that we covered here then. So we talked through those 4 core content areas of the ISSB standards: governance, strategy, risk management, and metrics and targets. But an important thing to remember is that these don't operate in silos. We saw in our examples that despite having 4 separate categories of disclosure, of course, in practice, these are all interconnected within companies. And so we also discussed how your disclosure might go beyond the requirements of S1 and S2, for example, to meet different stakeholder needs, to meet regulatory requirements in certain jurisdictions, or perhaps to align to industry standards as well. And what's important to remember when you're doing this is that the ISSB standards have been purposely developed to act as a baseline, and the building blocks approach allows report preparers to add additional disclosures on top. However, in doing so, you also do need to be careful not to obscure the requirements of S1 and S2. Okay, so with that summarised, we're going to have a quick reflection exercise as we did at the end of the last module, just to think through some of what we've learned so far in our own contexts. So with this exercise, we're looking at the key gaps that you're going to need to address in your current disclosures or internal processes. So you've probably heard from a lot of what we've talked about so far, maybe some things that are familiar and already being progressed in your organisations, but perhaps also some things that you might see as gaps as well. And maybe that could be about particular areas of disclosure content that you need to develop, but it could be about your internal processes, your capabilities, resources, etc. So we just want to take a moment really to reflect on what's front of mind for you in terms of your key gaps, and thinking about how you might prioritise those as well. So that's the reflection question essentially is, what are your key gaps that you need to address? And we do recommend really going away to do a fuller gap analysis, but this is just intended to start thinking really in that regard. Okay, so I'll give you all a moment to have a little think about that before we can go through and hear a few of what your responses are. I think it's always helpful for others to know, are they in a familiar company with similar organizations, maybe having the same gaps, or maybe there are different areas that others might highlight that you're not thinking about yet, etc. as well. Right, so I see someone has mentioned data. Yeah, I think that often comes up front of mind for many, that as we're moving into this standard space, perhaps from voluntary frameworks to standards and from greater connection to financial reporting and processes, the needs that you'll have in terms of the detail of data, the quality of it, and ensuring that it's, you know, well connected to financial information, definitely a step change for many organizations. Someone's mentioned sustainability risk assessment. Yes, indeed, that's obviously really foundational to all of this disclosure, is understanding what your risks and opportunities are. So getting an initial risk assessment or an opportunity assessment as well done that you can maybe build out from and plan around is very good starting point, I would agree. That someone's mentioned about calculating, and maybe in a similar line around perhaps the difficulties with scope 3 emissions and the specifics of the climate risks and metrics. Indeed, you know, lots to think about there, and hopefully the overview that we provided that went into some detail there on the climate side of things was useful as an overview. But as ever, I know it's always finding out what you need to do that's in these sessions can feel like a lot, but hopefully, you know, just prioritizing and thinking about what your key starting gaps are. And as Lois has highlighted there, if in particular that emissions reporting is something you're seeing as a gap, the IFRS have recently published some new educational material on this, which may indeed be helpful. So thanks for sharing that, Lois. And I can see as well people mention around integrating issues into governance. Indeed, exactly. So it's one thing identifying them, but actually taking that forward in your organization. Industry specific metrics, indeed. So that's where we'd recommend looking to the SASB standards, which sit alongside the S1 and S2 standards and provide more specifics for individual industries and topics. So we recommend looking at those as well. Maybe quality of data, the people and the processes, or maybe the regulatory requirements in your own country not necessarily providing clarity and direction yet, perhaps. The lack of staff. Someone's mentioned around climate transition plans as well, which we talked about earlier. So indeed, you know, developing a transition plan might be a new requirement to consider as part of S2. Although, as we said, it's not a requirement of S2 to have a transition plan, but just to disclose one if you do. Though, of course, there are many other positive reasons why you may wish to have a climate transition plan, and that's something that's developing a lot at the moment. So maybe needing to better organize data as well, someone's mentioned here, and to train your internal teams to strengthen your management of issues. Indeed. So I think, you know, if you are in that situation where it's pre these topics being mandated, maybe you don't have a direct regulatory driver, I think thinking about using this time for sort of upskilling as much as you can, and trying with your leadership team to look ahead to the future reporting requirements and build the case now for the resourcing you're going to need for that, is a good use of time if you can. Identifying discrepancies between the current state and desired goals and creating action plans to bridge them. Indeed, that seems like a very good structured approach, and is what we'd definitely recommend doing. As you say, you kind of need to understand where you are now and specifically where are the gaps against where you need to get to. And we hope that the takeaway in the homework exercise and the SSE gap analysis checklist, which is in that toolkit we've mentioned a few times, can support you in understanding that better. And someone said maybe having an ESG roadmap. So yes, perhaps that comes back to what we talked about at the start about your overall objective here. So maybe it's about reporting, but perhaps it's about your overall organization strategy as well. And again, data and risk metrics coming up. Yeah, thanks everyone for sharing those points. I think they do certainly chime with what we hear. You know, we run these sessions all over the world, and there's a lot of commonality, of course, in where people's challenges are. So some of the things we'd highlight that probably are worth starting to try and think about as you're understanding these gaps is maybe the move towards integrating this information with financial disclosures. So how to connect it into your financial reporting processes, or maybe just how to integrate the narrative disclosure within your annual report as well, which is something we'll come on to with Robert in the Communicate module later on. And of course, I think several of you have mentioned data, but as we're moving towards sort of higher requirements in terms of quality and robustness in our data processes, thinking about your controls environment and potentially the need to audit this information as well, also necessitates some thinking. So overall, I think, just getting an understanding of what these gaps are and thinking really which are the ones that are most significant to address prior to your first disclosures is what we'd recommend. Because of course, some of these things are going to be foundational to putting your reporting out, whereas some of them might be things that you could perhaps improve over time and you could evolve and progress as your reporting matures. So I think this is where we would really find that having that disclosure plan can help you to structure any prioritization of improvements, but also provide transparency to your stakeholders about, what you're reporting at present, but maybe where you want to get to as well with future reporting too. Brilliant. Thanks everyone for sharing all of those points. Okay, that wraps us up with the exercise, and I'll be handing back to Lois now for the start of implement.
Thank you, Fiona. So we've been through all of the content elements now, so we know what the standard wants us to report. And we're now going to move on to look at how this is done. Now, bear in mind that the standards are primarily about what to report. But there is some information about how it's done. So we're going to look at that in this unit, focusing a bit more on the how. There are three topics that we'll cover in this particular module. First of all, how to identify sustainability-related risks and opportunities. Secondly, we'll look at some of the evaluation processes that management need to consider, including scenario analysis. And thirdly, we'll look at how sustainability-related information considerations can be integrated into the company's existing processes and practices. So let's start with how to identify sustainability-related risks and opportunities. Well, the standards say that companies should provide material information on all sustainability-related risks and opportunities that could reasonably be expected to affect the company's prospects. And we know that S2 has specific requirements on climate-related disclosures. But what about risks and opportunities beyond climate? S1 directs companies to sources of guidance to support identification of risks and opportunities in addition to climate, and also on what information to disclose. So within S1, you'll see that the standard says that to identify relevant risks and opportunities, a company uses the ISSB standards, of course, but shall also consider the SASB standards. And these are the sector-specific standards we've already mentioned. So those standards will give you an idea of the types of disclosure topics and metrics that you might want to report on for your sector. And companies are required to consider those standards, which are available on the IFRS website. A company may also consider IFRS educational material on sustainability-related risks and opportunities and the disclosure of material information. There's quite a lot of educational material now from the ISSB, and it is helpful to refer to that. You can also look at the CDSB framework application guidance that covers a number of sustainability subjects, including biodiversity and human rights. You can look at frameworks issued by certain sectors and industry practices, and the materials of investor-focused standard setters, and integrated reporting would be one such example. So once you've used those sources of information to identify which risks and opportunities apply to your business and are expected to affect the company's prospects, the same sources of information should be consulted for determining which information about those risks and opportunities to disclose. But in this case, you can also use GRI standards and European sustainability reporting standards. And again, I go back to the CLP example where they showed us waste management. They had actually done this. They consulted SASB and GRI standards to help them. So we're going to look at an example now from a company called Ayala about their risk process, if you like, how they get to identifying sustainability related risks and opportunities. Ayala is a conglomerate company based in the Philippines. It's got lots of different activities, banking, healthcare, technology, and so on. And this is an extract from their integrated report. And here we can see the company, the way in which the company identifies risks and opportunities. They start with communication and consultation exercise, to get inputs into how they can improve their processes and so on. They ask a wide range of people, senior management, business units, and relevant stakeholders. Then the first step they take, bearing in mind what they've learned from communication and consultation, is to establish the risk context. So they look at internal and external factors that help them inform their risk identification and risk management. Secondly, they evaluate and prioritize the risks based on criteria which are likelihood and impact on the company's viability and operations. Thirdly, they decide what to do about the risk. How should they treat it? And finally, they have a monitoring and review part of their risk process. Another example we could look at is from a company called Nest. Nest is a company based in Finland. It's a leading producer of sustainable aviation fuel, renewable diesel, and feedstock solutions for the chemical industry. So it has a business model designed to produce sustainable solutions. This extract comes from the climate section of the company's annual report, and it shows how they identify risks and opportunities in two different scenarios and over a time horizon until 2050. The first scenario they use is called Net Zero World 2050 and Net Zero EU and North America by 2050. So it's the same scenario, but they've split the risk and opportunity assessment between the world and EU and North America because economies take action and develop at a faster or slower pace than others. So in that net zero scenario, they describe the opportunities and risks that they anticipate. So on a global basis, they see opportunities coming from expansion into new markets and sectors. In the EU and North America, they expect their supply of renewable and circular solutions to be supported by regulation and voluntary ambitions. Of course, they identify risks too in this scenario, and they are associated with competition and the acceleration of new technologies. The second scenario they look at is called the compromised target scenario, which anticipates that climate action is slow and global warming of 2.5 to 3 degrees C is expected. Similarly, the company sees that it has opportunities to differentiate itself from others through the provision of renewable and circular solutions, but the risk is in that scenario that the demand for those products might be constrained. final thing to say about this example is in each case we get the indicative financial impact from the risk and opportunities described in the scenarios. And the most positive indicative financial impact is in Net Zero World 2050. And perhaps we should expect that this of a company whose business model is very focused on developing renewable fuels and circular economies. So let's go back a little bit to something we discussed earlier, which is known as a proportionality mechanism, or a way of the standard recognizing that it can be difficult to identify and report on sustainability related risks and opportunities. And this is why the standard says that a company for that purpose is only required to use all reasonable and supportable information available at the reporting date without undue cost or effort. But what does that actually mean? It means that reasonable and supportable information is specific to the company. So not just generic statements, but information that enables a reader to understand the impacts on the actual company and understand how the company is affected. Secondly, it should take account of the external environment. And we certainly saw that, didn't we, in the Ayala example, where that was one of the steps they took was to understand the context. Thirdly, reasonable and supportable information should include information about past events and current conditions with which the company will be familiar, but also forecasts. And perhaps this is why Nest used scenario analysis to help inform their risks and opportunities. And in some cases, the ISSB standards specify what is reasonable and supportable and commensurate with the company's circumstances. But Fiona's going to take us through the next part of the implement module now.
Brilliant. Thank you, Lois. So as Lois says, this brings us into the next segment on evaluating risks. So once we've identified those risks, companies, of course, need to then evaluate the financial effects of the risks and opportunities. And this, of course, we know can be one of the most daunting aspects to start with. So let's briefly review a few key concepts that can help us with this process. So to help investors understand a company's resilience against climate risk, S2 requires a company to disclose information about the implications of climate change on its strategy and business model. And it also asks for the company's financial and operational capacity to adjust or adapt over the short, medium, and long term. For example, you might test your company's resilience against a new regulation to limit certain high emissions activities, or perhaps its ability to respond to changing crop yields due to more frequent heat waves. And to do this, you'll need to use climate scenarios drawing from science and analyse how these scenarios will lead to the company's potential effects. And it's important to remember, scenario analysis is not asking you to predict the future or forecast what will happen. It's a tool to test your resilience. So you're simply looking at plausible, possible future events, not a particular subscription that this will happen or prediction. And S2 doesn't specify which scenarios a company should use in its analysis, but overall it asks that companies should select relevant scenarios and provide information about which it's selected, and it should explain the assumptions that it's used in the analysis. And S2 also includes guidance on how a company can determine its approach to scenario analysis. And this can include a range of practice, perhaps starting with qualitative scenario narratives and moving to more quantitative statistical methods over time. So overall, the ISSB standards require a company to use an approach that's commensurate with its circumstances and that uses all reasonable and supportable information available to the company at the reporting date without undue cost or effort. So let's use an example now to zone in a bit and see how this comes out in our disclosures. So you're probably familiar with the Swiss multinational food and drinks company, Nestlé, who we're using here. And this output that we can see is one aspect of their climate scenario analysis that they included in their 2024 reporting. And the visual here shows the potential impact of physical climate changes on the yield of 12 of their key agricultural commodities for 2040 under a medium emissions scenario. And the modelled metric is the projected percentage change in crop yields compared to 2022. So the analysis here projects that there will be increased heat waves, droughts, and water stress, which could impact the availability and quality of key raw materials. And in turn, Nestle go on to say that this could lead to increases in their pricing and the input costs for their products. And of course, as well, if there are changes in yield for some raw materials, this could also affect the stability and resilience in their supply chain, potentially leading to impacts on customer supply. And in the reporting that goes alongside this, they go on to summarise the outcomes of the analysis for different areas of their business and the steps they're then taking to improve their resilience as a result of this analysis. And so overall, they show that both on their business model and their resilience and financial planning, there's a lot of action that they're going to be taking to try and increase that resilience as a result of what they've identified here. Okay, so when we're anticipating the materiality of future events, we know that can be very challenging. So to help with this determination, IFRS S1 asks you to consider a number of different issues to help you here. And so you can think about the list here as a list of identifying all the steps and information needed to come to this judgment. So really what we're asking in this list of things is that any uncertainty relating to these financial effects and their impact on future cash flows needs to be evaluated and disclosed. And so this also needs to be something that's kept under constant assessment and is reviewed for each reporting period. So yes, it's recognised that uncertainties exist, but what's important is that we are assessing those systematically and we're reporting on them alongside the information. Okay, back to you, Lois. Oh, are you there, Lois? Yeah, you're coming.
Yes, thank you, Fiona. Yes, just was looking at some of the great questions we're getting. We do love your questions. So we're moving on to the last part now of the implement module, and this is about how to integrate sustainability related disclosure considerations into your processes. Now, as we talked about before, the good news is that you may already have many processes within your organization that can be used to support sustainability disclosure, but you might need some new ones or you might need to adapt your existing one. So considerations that apply when thinking about whether you can use existing systems, you need to adapt them or develop something new, include strategies like a gap analysis. And I think some of you raised this in the Menti earlier. So the gap analysis would enable you to check for gaps in existing systems and processes. You should also look at whether the existing processes are suitable, both in terms of the process itself, but also the criteria they use. So in some cases, likelihood and impact may not be sufficient for prioritizing sustainability-related risks and opportunities, just because of the particular characteristics of sustainability risks, whether they're more uncertain and they unfold over longer time horizons. So you might want to include new prioritization criteria like vulnerability and speed of onset. You can look at the company's controls to evaluate whether your internal risk controls are suitable for supporting sustainability disclosure. Also, people. Which people, departments, experts are going to be required to help prepare your disclosures, and what processes do they already have that can contribute to your disclosures? You might want to think about the interconnections between different internal and external factors. So you may have people that are already working on strategic planning, but they might be helped by looking at the connections with external scenarios, for example. Your processes might need to take account of uncertainties that are associated with sustainability-related risks and opportunities, and you might need a process that helps you manage those uncertainties or even describe them to others. And finally, think about what resources are already in place to help with sustainability disclosure, but whether you need anything new and whether you might need to go through a budget approval process or a change management process to help progress that. Now, the homework that we have suggested that you do if you want to progress your learning is to develop a disclosure plan. So what is a disclosure plan? Well, it is a good way to integrate sustainability related risks and opportunities into an organization's practices and processes. So it can be a standalone strategy that just helps you plan your sustainability disclosures, or it could be part of a wider disclosure strategy for the company that also covers your planning for disclosing your financial statements, your governance disclosures, your management reports, and so on. The disclosure plan enables a company to take control of its narrative. So many commentaries say that the value of disclosure is that it helps a company think about its own strategy. And indeed, the disclosure requirements ask you about your disclosure, your risks and opportunities, your company's governance arrangements, your company's strategy. And the disclosure plan helps you to focus on not only what the standards ask you to do, but also your own narrative within that. The disclosure plan supports collaboration, knowledge sharing, and cross-functional team discussions with staff, because what we anticipate with the disclosure plan is that it will actually make a record of who's involved, how they interact, perhaps through subcommittees, how they share knowledge, and how often they meet, what the information flows are, and so on. And most importantly, I think the disclosure plan acts as a reference point and audit trail that sets a record of where and how judgments have been made, decisions on which audiences the company has to or want to communicate with, how data will be sourced, what existing systems and controls will be used, whether the company will get assurance for all or some of its disclosures, what are the sign-off procedures, who's involved, what timelines are involved, and so on. So let's have a look at an example now from a company called Novo Nordisk. Now this extract from Novo Nordisk, which is a Danish pharmaceutical company, sets out the basis for the preparation of their sustainability statement. And lots of the information we see here would be included in a disclosure plan. So first of all, the company outlines the regulations and the standards and practices it has to or has chosen to use for its disclosures. So you can see in the second paragraph, the long list here, the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, Science-Based Targets Initiative, the GRI standards, some regulations that the company is required to conform with. So this means that the reader understands which frameworks, standards, and laws the sustainability disclosures have been prepared according to. They also set out the approach and scope used for data collection and verification of their reports, why and how changes have been made to their reporting, including how they correct errors over time by making restatements. They explain how estimates have been used and where to find more information about their assumptions and uncertainties, and lots of other helpful contextual information that enables readers to better understand what's being reported and how it's been done. So you can appreciate, I'm sure those of you involved in reporting, that it's helpful to agree these types of things before the reporting cycle starts, so that there are no surprises at the end, and you've done your preparation in the form of a disclosure plan. Let's look at an example Zoom poll now. And the question is a disclosure plan required by the IFRS sustainability disclosure standards? You can only make a single choice, either yes, and you must disclose your plan, or no, but it's a very helpful tool. Give you a minute to think about this. In the interests of time, I'm going to end the poll and share the results. Very interesting result indeed. Let's share the results. You'll see that it's quite evenly split, but the most of you have said no, but it's a very helpful tool. And you are right. Those of you that said no are correct. There is nothing in the IFRS sustainability standards that says a company is required to have a disclosure plan and to make disclosures about it. There are some content requirements that say that you must disclose the methodology that you've used for preparing information, but there's no requirement to have an overall disclosure plan. So well done, you got that question right. Many of our audiences don't. Let's have a look at another Zoom poll now before we go to the Module 3 summary. What can a disclosure plan do? Does it help a company to take control of its narrative within general purpose financial reports? I don't see the Zoom poll come up yet, but hopefully you do. Does it help them support collaboration and knowledge sharing? Act as a reference point and audit trail for disclosures, or skip full disclosure? I'm sure if people can see the Zoom poll, I can't.
Yes, we have the poll on our side, Lois. So
Oh, good. Can I leave it to you to give us the results, Fiona?
sure. Yes, I think it was me next anyway, so sounds good.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lois. Great. So just to give everyone a couple more seconds on that before we wrap up. In the interest of time, I think I'm going to close things there and let's have a look at your results. So it looks like most of you selected certainly the top two answers, and some people selected the third one as well, but a few less of you responding to the final option, and that is indeed correct. All of those top three are correct answers. But as most of you guessed correctly, the aim of the disclosure plan is indeed not to skip disclosure, full disclosure under the ISSB, but just to support it and inform it. Okay, fantastic. We'll stop there. I'm going to turn my light back on again. I'm so sorry. I don't know why the automatic timer's not working in this room. There we go. Now you can see me, but I can't really see much otherwise. Brilliant. So we'll just do a quick summary of the module. So reminding ourselves on a few key things we've covered here. So firstly, we really focused on connections. So in the last module, we wrapped up highlighting the importance of connections between the four core content areas of disclosure. And then in this module, we talked as well about the connections between a company and its external and internal environment. And that's what we really need to focus on to identify risks and opportunities. And the second thing we discussed in this module related to evaluating the risks and opportunities, and a key component of that being the evaluation in a consistent way where you document your assumptions. And then we introduced there some concepts around how you can use scenario analysis to assess resilience and be consistent in how you approach and report these issues. And finally, as we've seen, even if some of this data perhaps isn't already information you're disclosing publicly, it may well already be information you're collecting for different reasons, or something that you do have practices and processes in place that could support you to report it. So to do our best to support us there, we'll try not to start from scratch where we don't need to, and to use what we already have to inform our reporting. Okay, so I'll jump quickly into the Menti exercise in the interest of time. I'll keep the kind of question maybe simple and let you just share what you think. So the question really is around what existing systems and processes you might have that can support you on that data collection front. So we've heard a lot already about the types of information and assessment that we might want to take, and hopefully that's prompted some thinking for you about what sources that you might already be able to draw on within your organisation that can support you with that, whether that be to undertake a climate scenario analysis, maybe to report some of your metrics, perhaps to better understand other types of risk. There should be a lot, I'm sure, within your organisations that can help you. So just a quick opportunity to reflect on any thoughts and ideas you might have about those different sources of data that you already have, or perhaps how you might need to adapt to existing processes to support you to do that better as well. Okay, I see a couple of responses coming in. We're going to keep this one quite quick. So if you've got some thoughts, please do share them so we get time to have a look at them together. Someone's here has mentioned around integrating with management systems. Yes, so maybe we're talking about things like ISO environmental or other management systems as well, possibly as one option, or just generally management systems. But yeah, exactly. A lot of those standards are set up to support us in having a structured approach to managing and collecting this type of information. So definitely a helpful reference point. Some people here have mentioned different sources of data for emissions activities. So indeed, a lot of the underlying information that you'll use to calculate emissions comes from different activities in the business. So as this person correctly identifies, your utility bills or electricity costs for your scope 2 associated with energy use, electricity use. And then maybe they've also suggested as well, if you're looking for scope 3, things like your expenses from travel, HR information on your employees' commuting patterns and things like that. And maybe my GHG measurement is a tool, or maybe it's a particular just framing to what they're saying here. So I'll give everyone just another second or two if they have anything they want to highlight. But I think from our side, a few things that we would mention, as it's kind of been suggested in some of these comments, is looking at your enterprise risk management system as well will be really key. So if you already have an established risk process, trying to use that wherever possible to assess the sustainability risks and opportunities is very helpful. Someone here has mentioned about budgeting under different scenarios for risk assessment processes as well. Yeah, so that sounds interesting. So yeah, thinking about maybe lower, medium, and worst case type scenarios and what the financial impacts of that could be as a different range. Getting things validated by the SBTI maybe will help with the robustness of your target setting. Lots of different sources mentioned here. So surveys and interviews, audits, internal audit results, definitely. Brilliant. No, thanks everyone for sharing those. So I think lots of points that we would have definitely recommended that you think about. And probably one thing as well we just close on here is to highlight that the importance of thinking about the governance around this data now. So where we talked about the governance requirements initially, thinking about who's going to be responsible for data, how you're going to set up a robust approach to this is really key as well. Brill, thank you everyone. So that brings us up to the close of this module, and I'm going to hand to Robert now for our final module.
Sorry, great. Thank you very much, Fiona. Yes, we'll be moving now to the final module of this webinar, and I'll be talking about some couple of remaining items. The module is called Communicate, so we'll be focusing on when and where to disclose the sustainability of financial information. And so this is the very last module, and we have 3 units here. So the first one will start with the location and timing. We'll talk about efficiency and about how to build the confidence. And the first topic will be then the location and where the disclosure should be reported and where should be located. But before we go into the details and what it's said in the requirements, I want to just zoom out a little bit and think about sustainability disclosures in the context of the holistic, complete reporting package that is useful to investors. So as you see on the slides, on the left-hand side, investors already have an access to companies' financial statements, and ISB standards are designed to identify sustainability-related risks and opportunities that complement financial statements. So these all come together then in a reporting package that we call a general purpose financial report. And these requirements in ISB standards, the requirements in ISB standards are about the information to reports are based on existing sustainability reporting regimes, focus on investor information and needs, and on aspects of financial accounting standards. So that's what is on the left-hand side, and on the right-hand side you see the GRI standards, which they expand on sustainability metrics relevant to broader societal concerns. So then together, ISSB and GRI reporting standards share common requirements and what to report, but ISSB standards are focused only on investors' information needs and decision-making, reflecting the mission of the IFRS Foundation to bring transparency, accountability, and efficiency to capital markets around the world. So this is about the regulatory landscape. Oh yeah, sorry. So before both, so just focusing again, going back to so both organizations take different approach to define materiality, but they're not competing. So the JIRA approach is set out to understand and set out and understood among sustainability practitioners, whereas IFRS approach is familiar to accountants. So together, these frameworks enable companies to meet the growing demand for transparent, consistent information across financial and non-financial dimensions, aligning both investor priorities and broader societal expectations. All right, and then we'll revisit the material information again. We were discussing that before as well, but just to refresh, because that's a really key concept. And this is relevant here as well. So as we just noted, materiality has different definitions for different reporting standards and audiences. In identifying material information to be disclosed, a company will first need to identify the sustainability-related risks and opportunities that could reasonably be expected to affect its prospects. And once the company has identified those risks and opportunities, it can then determine what information to provide about those risks and opportunities. And here is where our materiality definition comes into play. So the definition of material information used is based on and aligned with definition found in accounting standards. And the definition states that it is information that, if omitted, misstated, or obscured by other information, could reasonably be expected to influence investment decisions. In other words, IFB standards seek to identify disclosures of key information that matters to investors. So an entity determines what constitutes a sustainability-related risk and opportunity based on its facts and circumstances. And entities often have already well-established processes for identifying, assessing, and reporting to sustainability-related risks and opportunities as a part of their management of their businesses. All right, and so once we have that clarified, we can just mention a few matters which are important when disclosing material information. Investors have asked for disclosure of material information, and ISB standards have been designed to help you gather and disclose it. However, this means that a company does not need to disclose information that is not material, even if the ISB standards include a specific requirement. So a couple of things to remember here. You must ensure that material information is clearly identifiable and that you use plain language. And also you have to ensure that material information is not scattered or across your disclosures. And finally, they need to include any additional non-material disclosures if required by regulators, but ensure it is clearly identified as such. IFRS has recently released, or not really recently, but there is some further education material providing guidance for companies identifying and disclosing material information on sustainability-related risks and opportunities, which we would encourage you to look for further detail. Okay, and to check your understanding of what we have just discussed, is we have another poll, and the question stands here. What is the information and what should be the qualities and information disclosed in the annual reporting when applying ISB standards? So the question is, A, omitting the information could reasonably be expected to influence investor decisions. B, it could reasonably be expected to affect the company's cash flows. C, it exemplifies the values of the leadership team. So what the standard is saying about the disclosing of material information, what are those three, or what are the elements which means that information should meet? Is it A, B, and C? Please do select which all they apply. And great, we're almost approaching the 50% of the of you participating in this poll, and then most of you are getting it right. So yes, it is about the correct answers are A and B. So it's about information which could influence investors' decisions and which can affect the company's cash flows. It's not about values of the leadership team. So A and B are correct. C is incorrect. Congratulations to those who answered that. Okay, thank you. And now we going to the core section of this unit. We were talking about the location of the disclosures. So the disclosures under ISB standards has to accompany the financial statements and be part of the same general purpose financial reporting package. But as one does not say where in the reporting package the information shall be provided. This is designed to allow jurisdiction-specific requirements on the location of reporting. The most important factor to consider here is, though, to ensure that sustainability disclosures are provided as a part of the same reporting package as the company's financial statements. So sustainability disclosures must be provided at the same time as the related financial statements, cover the same reporting period, and be authorized by the same body or individual authorizing the financial statements. And to exemplify this, we have another a practical illustration which will be presented by Lois. Over to you.
Thanks, Robert. And this example is from Ayala again, the Philippines-based conglomerate based in Philippines. And this is from their integrated report. So they have used the integrated reporting value creation model to summarize the way in which they present their information and the content that they present. So you can see that down the left-hand side, they list the capitals that are used for creating value in their value creation process, which is in the middle of the screen in the orange circle. And also they tell us the value generated on the right-hand side of the column. So if we focus on the orange circle, you can see that for Outlook material, topics, stakeholders, risks and opportunities, we see the page number where these information about these topics can be found. Also in the middle of the circle, you can see that there are icons used to help the reader navigate to particular types of information. So under vision pillars, we see a little skull with a cog or wheel inside it. And this on the right-hand side, we see relates to focused strategic execution. So the Ayala has an integrated report into which they provide sustainability related information, but using this diagram, which is almost like a contents index, we see where information is presented and how it can be navigated using page numbers and icons, all within the context of their value creation model. Of course, this comes from a PDF. We've taken the snip from a PDF document, but reporting is also increasingly made through digital channels that Robert's going to explain to us now.
Yes, great. Thank you very much, Lois. Right, so let's then talk about technology and their influence of technology and the role of technology in the sustainability reporting. So it is an emerging consideration for disclosures, technology and digital reporting. So what it means, it's increasingly corporate reporting is moving from PDF reports towards information on web pages with structured data sets, such as those databases which are offered by stock exchanges. Therefore, this foundation has created the ISB taxonomy, which reflects the requirements and accompanying materials of the ISB standards. So the taxonomy does not introduce a new requirement. A digital taxonomy provides the common elements or tags which needed to make your sustainability disclosures machine readable. This makes it easier for large data sets like information from entire industry to bring them all together to analyze them. And it has the number of benefits. It makes the reported information easier to use for analysis. Data is structured the same way across businesses in a machine readable format. Tagging information also potentially allows for automated checks for quality and consistency. More and more data collection and management systems are now compatible with digital reporting taxonomies. And finally, tags can have labels and descriptions in multiple languages. If you report your quantitative data in one language, someone speaking another language can also understand what it means. All right, so that was about ISSB taxonomy and tagging. And what does it mean for the reporting? We're now moving to the next section in this unit, in this module, efficiency. So following the discussion on location and timing, let's think about ensuring efficient disclosures. We added this to the training because a common comment we find from companies that there is a growing reporting burden, and what we hope to highlight is when done correctly, efficiency can be made to reduce that burden. So let's talk about first effective communication. It's important to understand what effective communication looks like and what is required. So often companies think that if they just put all their information they have into a report, everyone will be satisfied. However, this would be against the core concepts in particular for presentation. So, for example, it could be helpful to ask following questions. Is that information clear and concise? By clear, that might depend on the nature of the information. For example, it could be clear and easier to read to present information in tables, graphs, diagrams with associating text. And then secondly, concise. To be concise, disclosure need to avoid boilerplate information, unnecessary duplication of information, and to use a clear language. Moving to the next part on the quality of information disclosed. Some preparers watching today might be thinking to themselves that they still don't see what is the fuss all about. And perhaps that's comes from their experience, which focuses on standalone sustainability reports, or they didn't have much interaction with external audit. To the accountants watching, I would say be kind to your colleagues. Help them to understand the difference in rigor that is required in data collection, oversight, sign-off, etc. for the financial statements. So this so the quality of information might be meaning here that disclosures would include comparative information and be restated as necessary. Disclosures should avoid unnecessary duplication and cross-reference as required. And again, the information has to be material, be connected, aggregated or disaggregated appropriately. Good. And now we mentioned cross-referencing, and so let's then see what does mean according to standards. Because as you may have already noticed, there may appear to be some overlap in the disclosure topics. For example, you might have the same governance approach for all sustainability issues. And then, rather to duplicate certain information, you can use cross-referencing to enhance efficiency of the disclosures. So cross-referencing to other reports is permitted as long as the other report is available on the same terms at the same time as the sustainability disclosures. And cross-reference information then is assumed to become a part of the reporting package. And cross-referencing shall be applied consistently and transparently, and it should not result in the information becoming more difficult to understand. And one of the examples or how it can be done we have here, and again, it will be presented by Lois.
Thank you. Thank you, Robert. And this is an example from a company called ArcelorMittal, which is a global mining company, and it illustrates one way of cross-referencing. So you can see that the company calls this a reporting index, and down the left-hand column, they set out the IFRS content, elements and concepts, which we've been talking about today. So governance, risk and opportunities, strategy, outlook, etc. And what they do in the right-hand column is show where you can find information about this, so how they've responded to these content elements. Now, sometimes the cross-referencing is within the report that this reporting index appears in. So this reporting index is in their sustainability report. And for example, under governance, you'll see that they refer us to the governance and risk management section within the sustainability report. In other cases, they cross-refer to external reports. So in the case of risk and opportunities, they refer us to their Form 20F for more information on risk management. So a nice simple way of illustrating where information can be found by cross-reference within the report and to another report from ArcelorMittal. Back to you, Robert.
Thank you, Lois. Right, so we'll be moving now to some mechanisms that have been adopted or introduced to support the adoption. And at ISSB, we have sought to apply a number of mechanisms to support preparers to get started with the ISB standards. And so, first of all, one simple thing might be putting in place well-known terminology and concepts familiar to preparers, borrowing from them IASB accounting standards, for example. Secondly, many requirements in S1 and S2 are to be applied proportionally, recognizing companies will have a range of capabilities and preparedness on these issues. So, for example, qualitative scenario analysis are permitted, and you will see the phrase all reasonable and supportable information without undue cost or effort or commensurate with skills, capabilities, and resources in a number of places. Then there are a number of reliefs for the first year of application, and these include, firstly, companies being able to limit their disclosure to climate in year 1 and begin reporting under other sustainability-related risks and opportunities in year 2. Companies will also, the other relief is that the companies be able to provide annual sustainability-related financial disclosures with their next half-year reporting rather than at the same time as the financial statements. Another relief will be considering Scope 3 greenhouse gas emissions. Might apply the need to apply the greenhouse gas protocol corporate standards to measure emissions if they are already using a different measurement approach. So they don't need to apply greenhouse gas protocol standard to measure emissions if they are already using a different measurement approach, or provide comparative information in the first year of reporting S1 on S2. Another relief allows companies to include greenhouse gas emissions information obtained from companies in a value chain with a different reporting cycle. We already mentioned a number of other sources and of guidance and resources, including SASB standards, CDSB framework, application guidance, among many others. These reliefs are designed to enable companies to put in place reporting practices and structures to provide high quality decision useful information. Great. So again, to wrap up and check your understanding of what we covered just recently, we have another poll, and it'll be about information and also qualities and characteristics of the information disclosed in accordance with the ISB standards. And the question is whether they should be, please do select all which apply. A, decision useful, B, material, C, misleading, D, comparable. So I'll give you just a moment, and I think this is quite straightforward. And I'll end the poll in a moment. Yes, you're right. Of course, the information disclosed in accordance with ISB standards should be decision useful, material, and comparable, and should not be misleading. So A, B, and D are correct. The C is incorrect answer. Great. And another poll and now, so about the usefulness of the information. So information is decision useful. If it is, please do again select all correct ones. A, relevant and faithfully represent what it purports to represent. B, comparable. C, verifiable. D, timely. And E, understandable. I can't see the Zoom poll being launched, but hopefully you can. All right, I'm not sure what's here, but I'm sure you should be able to answer this one. All the options here are correct. So A, B, C, D, and E. These are all the qualities and characteristics of the useful information. So thank you to those who answered. Oh yeah, now I see it now. Okay, perfect. Yes, indeed. And I think most of you answered in this way. Okay, let's now move to the next part and next unit in this module. We'll talk about the confidence. So the last section of the last unit looks at how we can ensure that users of financial reports have confidence in data you're disclosing, as trust is an essential component of sustainability-related disclosures, and increasingly so with the growing concern over greenwashing. So one of the important trust builders is comparative information, because it provides context and it helps indicate progress and underpin strategy and risk management. So metrics disclosed by a company might be redefined and replaced over time, or the company might change its method for estimating metrics. In this situation, it's important for the company to revise the comparatives to enable investors to compare and analyze current period figures with the relevant prior period figures. Same for the material errors. So if there's a situation that the company, if that happens, so the company is required to restate these errors in the comparatives provided. And of course, in terms of comparative information, it can still be qualitative and quantitative. One important aspect here to mention is that companies sometimes express concern that with sharing information, they deem to be sensitive, and that if shared, it could deplete their competitive advantage. If that's the case, and so if there is information about sustainability-related opportunity that it's deemed to be commercially sensitive, if this is the concern, there is a further detailed, and you can read it in the handout. Great. The very last or almost last element is the statement of compliance. So it's important to build confidence by providing clear statements of compliance. A company that complies with all the requirements in the ASB standards is required to make an explicit statement of compliance, and there is a further guidance on that topic called voluntarily applying ASB standards, a guide for preparers. So please refer to that document. All right, and then we are at the end of this section. Apologies for rushing, but I'll be a bit of a short of time. So there's a list of topics here which I'd like you to go through and work through the list. Again, you can find in the handout slide deck an additional slide in this section of reminders on how to report effectively, and I do highly recommend reviewing that. And now I'll be handing over to Fiona, which she will provide a summary of the entire module 4. Over to you, Fiona.
Great, thank you, Robert, and indeed for keeping our timings on track. Much appreciated. So this brings us to the end of our final module, and before we wrap up, let's just take a quick moment to recap what we've learnt in this module. So firstly, we discussed where to report information. And what was important here was the audience, or who you are reporting to. So making sure to be clear from the start who the primary user of information is, and that will help you ensure that this information is the right information for their needs. Then we moved on to discussing efficiency, and I think the key takeaway here is that less is more. The objective isn't to overload investors with information, because actually that can be harmful, given it could obscure the information that's required. So using the standards as you get started can be a good guide to make sure you're providing what information investors need, which is of course the core purpose of the ISSB standards. And finally, we discussed report user confidence. And especially in the current climate of greenwashing accusations, you want to ensure that your data is not only accurate, but that it's presented in a way that builds confidence among report users. And so the reporting plan that we've been discussing and that you can take forward in your homework exercise if you'd like to, can help you to do this, because if it's done well, you'll have a clear and documented process for reporting the data that investors need. Okay, so we're going to go very quickly back into Menti now. I think we'll keep it quite brief in the interests of allowing me time to wrap up on our final points, but just a quick reflection question really on the techniques that you might find helpful to allow you to navigate reporting. Hopefully most people still have Menti available to them, but just as a quick reminder, Lois, if you wouldn't mind just quickly resharing the link, please, that would be great. And yeah, I guess it's just a quick point to reflect on in terms of any particular aspects that you find useful to help you to navigate your reporting. Thanks, Lois. I know Robert mentioned a few ideas already. I can share a few, but I think always useful to know what you guys think about this. One answer. Thank you. Consistent formatting. Indeed, yeah. So, if you're reporting across these different content topics, being consistent in how you present the information across different disclosure areas and the different content elements, being structured. I don't know what MIS is, unfortunately, but I'm sure that's helpful. Using cross-references and graphs, being comparable, a clear structure. Know the main goal of the report and why you're doing it. Yeah, exactly. What are don't just put everything in there. Why are you reporting? Who are you reporting to? So planning, hyperlinks, keywords, brilliant. I think, yeah, lots of the techniques that we would recommend as well. And I think from the examples we talked about, just having a clear navigation pane, using the interactive features of digital reporting, not just in PDFs, but in the XBRL world as well, can be very helpful. Fab, thanks everyone. So in the interests of time, I'll just scroll so we can see those last responses that we got through. Similar ideas, but they're great. And visualization, I think, is great to mention. Our last thing just to wrap up on in Menti is just to get a sense from you all as to where you feel you're at against those different objectives that we set ourselves at the start of the training. And hopefully we might have shifted ourselves a little bit along that scale in terms of our comfort, but it'd be great if you could just let us know where you think you're at now after today's training in your comfort level with these different objectives that we had. Okay, a bit of a mix again. Oh, I think we're around this point before, so maybe we're similar to before, perhaps a little teeny bit higher. I know sometimes the challenge with this training can be that you suddenly realize how much more there is to know and to go away and read up and understand in the very detailed requirements. So we know that this is just the start of the learning journey, but thanks for letting us know. And I think, yeah, maybe a little bit higher I'd give ourselves than where we started, but lots to learn, as I know. Okay, fab. Thanks, everyone. So a couple of quick points from me just to wrap up the session then in the final minutes. So firstly, just to speak about the homework assignment that we've mentioned a few times. As I said, this is voluntary. It's not mandatory to do it. You don't need to submit it to us. It's really just an optional exercise to help you continue your learning and to take forward these topics with your colleagues. I hope that we've conveyed today that we really would recommend having a disclosure plan as a structure to inform your approach here. So you'll find the plan that you can download to use them as an exercise from our event web page, which we've shared the link to in the chat again. Thanks, Lois. Oh, and management information systems, you're probably quite right, yes. And then just to mention as well, lots of different resources you can look to for further knowledge and guidance on this topic. So firstly, we have the IFRS Knowledge Hub, which covers all of the standards, educational materials from the IFRS, and an ongoing kind of update process with more guidance, webinars, e-learning, etc. We also have the IFC's Beyond the Balance Sheet program. IFC, another partner on this program, and they provide lots of different resources to support guidance on sustainability and climate reporting, particularly in emerging markets. And they also speak a lot about, general corporate governance principles in their materials, which can be very helpful. So yeah, definitely another one I'd very much recommend. And then as a reminder, we've mentioned the SSE Toolkit before. We work really closely with the IFRS to continue to develop more resources together to support ISSB adoption. So here are some of the tools again that we have, and you can find all of these on our web page at the QR code there or in the handout, which you can find again on the web page for this event that we've shared the link to. Okay, so a big well done to everyone who stayed with us throughout this live online training. We know it's a long time to concentrate for in the long online environment, and so we're really appreciative of your engagement and participation. So as a recognition of that, you're now able to receive a completion certificate for taking part in the course. So to receive your certificate, what you will need to do is to fill out the feedback form that Lois has just shared the link to in the chat. You might want to copy and paste that message out for yourself that Lois has just sent there if you'd like a reminder of these instructions. There will also be, within 24 hours of today's session from Zoom, another email which will share the link to all participants again for this survey. So if you've missed it today, you'll also get it from Zoom if you participated with us live. Once you fill out that feedback survey, you'll be on the list to receive a certificate. Please give us up to 7 working days to issue your certificate, just as we're running lots of training at the moment and it's quite busy, but you'll receive your certificate in around a week after filling out the form. And we do recommend, if you're having any issues receiving it, possibly maybe trying a different email address, maybe a personal email address, because I know some organisations do block the certificates when we send them. But keep an eye out there at the chat for the link to do that, which you've seen there. And so just before we close, a final thank you, firstly to the SSE supporters who really champion and make this work possible. And of course, especially to everyone who's supported us today. So our partners at the IFC and the IFRS Foundation, and especially Bella and Robert who've joined us today. And then, of course, a big final thank you to the team at FEAS for hosting us today and their championing of this topic as well. And last but not least, a big thank you, of course, to all of you who have joined us. We really appreciate your time and engagement in today's session and wish you all the very best with your future reporting journeys. So we'll close the session there, and thanks all. Have a great rest of your day.